Still Loading Podcast is brought to you by the wonderful people on Patreon. Amazing people like Ryan K., Eric H., Kevin from the Bit by Bit Foundation, Gilmer, Stephen P., Matt aka Stormageddon, and Mr. Biscuits have been wonderful enough to support the show over on Patreon. So if you would also like to get your name read at the beginning of an episode along with a bunch of other goodies, go over to patreon.com/stillloadingpod and check out everything it has to offer. On this episode of Still Loading, 9/9/1999. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Koval, and today's episode, it's been a long time since I've done a console retrospective, but it is a very special anniversary, at least at the time this episode is coming out. About 25 years ago, I actually have to check because my episodes come out Sunday. Will this actually be, is 9/9 September 9th actually on a Sunday? No, it's September 8th. So this is coming out the day before the 25th anniversary of the console we are talking about, and we are talking about Sega's final foray into the console manufacturing business. We are talking about the Sega Dreamcast, and I have two wonderful guests with me on this episode. We'll start off with a guest who has not been on in quite some time. I think it's, well, actually, no, you were in the 10th anniversary episode, but in terms of being on like a main line episode, it's been a while. So my buddy Andrew from the Experience Point. Andrew, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I was starting to wonder, you were like, you haven't been on in a while. And I was like, wait, we record all the time. But I'm thinking of our Talk Tuesdays over on the Experience Point, where you are a frequenter for our weekly talk show.
What a sneaky plug right in there. I like it.
Yes, it became less sneaky when you called it out. But I'm doing great. I'm super excited to talk about the Dreamcast because it is possibly, and I realized this while looking up and making a little top 10 Dreamcast games list, it might be my favorite console of all time. And I don't think I've ever said that out loud or to myself.
So no hyperbole. You're arguably your favorite console of all time.
I think it depends on the day, but it used to be between the N64 and the original Xbox. But when I looked at the just incredible roster of games that this console has, I was like, it may be recency bias too, but I was like, holy crap, these are all incredible titles. So I'm very excited to talk this with you.
Especially the launch lineup, man. They had a crazy launch lineup, which we will get into. But
yeah, maybe the best of all time.
Arguably, it's one of the reasons it's still looked at so fondly by gamers today. But we are not alone, Andrew and I. We are joined by returning guest from the Zillion episode just a couple months prior, Carlson from the YouTube channel My Life in Gaming, as well as the podcast Here's My Question for You. Corey, how are you doing today?
Hey, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me back. I've after the last couple episodes. Now it feels like I'm hitting the big time. After Zillion and what was the one before that?
We did Streets of Rage, I think. The
Streets
original
of Rage.
Streets
Yes,
of Rage.
the first Streets of Rage. But I mean, that's big time. But the Dreamcast is real big time.
Well,
I can't believe you made a zillion episodes. I know you've been podcasting for a while, Josh, but a zillion?
Oh man, Andrew, have you ever actually seen the anime Zillion?
No, but I remember looking up gameplay for it, and I was like, this looks like it would be a better anime. And I remember you saying, like, it is an anime.
Yes, it is an anime, and it is a better anime than the game. Though the game's not as bad as, is not that bad. But that, if anyone's interested in that episode, it was back earlier this year. I don't remember the episode number. I don't have it up in front of me, but it was earlier this year. And Corey and I were joined by another friend of Corey's, Tiger Chainsaw from the YouTube channel Tiger Chainsaw, or TC for short. But yeah, we are here to discuss the Sega Dreamcast. 25 years of Sega's final foray into the console space, and what a way to go out! It looked promising at first, and it ended up being a last gasp. As I'm not taking credit for that phrasing. I've heard, you've seen that all over the place online, whether it's written or in videos, and actually. Some of the research I did, shout out to your co-host, Corey, Chris. I think it's Chris, right? Chris from Classic Gaming Quarterly, who had a fantastic video. It's an hour-long video on the launch of the Sega Dreamcast, and I got some of my information from his video. I will also shout out the Gaming Historian's video on this, and oh my gosh, I feel bad. There's one other video that I used. Matt McMuscles.
I love him.
Yeah, fantastic videos, all of them. So I want to shout out my sources at the very least, because these are from fellow content creators. So I want to make sure give them props where it's due, especially right at the top of the episode. But before we dive into the history and and the experiences and everything, or I guess this partially as experiences, but before we dive into the history and the games and all things related to that, I want to throw it over to both of you about your personal history with this console. Like, how did you first kind of come to know it? When did you first play it? What are your first experiences with it, or your just kind of general recollections around it? Corey, I know you have an interesting viewpoint on this, so I'm going to save you for last. So, Andrew, I'm going to throw it over to you. What is what's your experience with the Dreamcast?
Oh, okay. I'm dying to hear Corey's story, but I also now just thought of you should have a segment where you tell stories and call it Corey time. Anyway, my experience with the Dreamcast is maybe a bit different, but also maybe similar to. It's a very 90s story. My family did not have a lot of money growing up, so
sorry, a very 90s story sounds like your autobiography.
Ooh, I like that.
A very 90s story, the Andrew Kinsey, or a very 90s story, the Andrew Kinsey biography. Anyway, sorry, go on.
I like that. I'm taking that note down. So we didn't have a lot of money growing up, and I got consoles like pretty late. I got a Sega Genesis when the N64 was about to come out. I got an N64 when PS2 maybe was about to come out. No, I don't think it was that late. I got an N64 around when it first came out, maybe a couple years after. But I wanted a Dreamcast really bad, and it was not too long after that era of N64, PS1, and so my parents were like, no, you got Dreamcast money? And I was like, no, because I am, I don't know what, 11, 12. And so, but I had a friend who did have money, and they had all the consoles, and he was like, yo, I got a Dreamcast, you got to come over and play it. And I was a little bit salty. I was like, I mean, yeah, it doesn't even look that good, but like, it's probably fine. And I was just jealous. So I went over his place one time, and it descended from the heavens like into my hand, and I was like, oh my God, what is this? And we played, I mean, he had, Crazy Taxi, Sonic Adventure, like the basic
yeah
the basic games, and like he was really into sports, so he had like whatever MLB, or maybe it was a football game that came with it, and I was blown away. And I remember, obviously we were talking about Game Informer a little bit before we started recording. RIP. This is we'll pour one out for Game Informer. But I watched I read a lot of coverage of the Dreamcast coming out, and it was very hyped for me. And what really drew me to it and really made me want it, aside from, Sonic and Crazy Taxi, was I was a big like arcade rat kid. And you're going to see this be very evident when I talk about my top 10 Dreamcast games. They're all arcade ports, just about all of them, and most of them are Capcom fighting games. We had never really seen at this level of bringing the arcade home. So when I saw, like, not to spoil some of the games on my list, but Street Fighter Third Strike and Marvel vs. Capcom that you could play at home, I was like, holy crap. And I tried to use that to justify to my parents this purchase. I was like, okay, I always ask to go to the mall all the time. I don't know why my voice was like this when I was a kid. I always want to go to the mall all the time. And you guys are always like, okay, I guess we can go to the mall. And then I'm always like, but I just wanted to go to the arcade. And you're like, okay, well, here's $10 of like quarters and you can just go play an arcade. And then I just go waste them. But like, you can put that towards a Dreamcast. I can play the arcade at home. And they're like, why do you talk like that? You've never spoken like this before. And I was like, it was probably a head injury. And so that's what I really wanted the Dreamcast for. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough money to purchase one until I was in my early 20s, and I bought one off of eBay and got all of those wonderful arcade games. But that is my experience with the Dreamcast. It was a star-crossed love experience, the one that got away, so to speak. I loved it when I played it at a friend's house, and I always wanted more, and I never got it until I had big boy money.
Big boy money. I'll go next just because mine is very limited. My experience with this is very limited. I would feel bad ending this segment with like an anticlimactic, like I'm not trying to fluff up your story too much, Corey.
Yeah, no pressure.
Right.
Well, no, but mine genuinely is like there's not a whole lot to it. So when I was growing up, my first console was the N64. I've talked about this on the show a bunch. One of my favorite systems to this day. But I feel do y'all have that friend growing up who was like really weird, but you were still friends with them, and then years later you realize they were actually really creepy, and you were too naive or ignorant to realize how creepy they actually were?
Was I that friend for you, Josh?
No,
Is that why you're still
friends? We met in college. What are you talking about?
I know. I'm just kidding.
Well, that friend, his name was Chris. No, nothing to do with Classic Gaming Quarterly Chris that I mentioned before. Completely different Chris, spelled differently too. But I remember going over to his house for like a birthday party sleepover. There's a bunch of other kids there, and he had every console that I could ever think of at the time. He had the N64. He had the PS1. He had a Genesis. He had a Dreamcast. And the Dreamcast, I remember, was in his brother's room in the basement. And I was playing like Crazy Taxi and other stuff like that. So that was my first experience with the Dreamcast until I started collecting and got my own. But for the longest time, and I still kind of equated to this, and it's not necessarily like it doesn't create a negative connotation for me of the Dreamcast, but for the longest time, to me, Dreamcast was like analogous with my creepy friend from childhood. And it has never ruined my perception of the Dreamcast because I'm able to, like, they just remind me of each other, even though, I don't know, that kid was just weird as shit. But that's a story for a different day that I don't think I'll ever share on the podcast. That makes it sound more ominous than it is.
I wonder what they're doing now.
I know, right?
Where did he touch you, Josh?
I'm going to stop digging this hole here. But that's my experience with the Dreamcast. It's just I saw it over at a friend's house, and I remember just being like blown away by one, how it looked, because I'd never seen graphics like that at the time. This was I think the PS2 was already out, but we did not have one, or no one I knew really had one. So he had all the different systems that were available other than like some of the newest ones. And I thought that was really cool. And yeah, that was my first experience with the Sega Dreamcast. I mean, I might have... Yeah, because I'm trying to think when I would have gone over for that sleepover. I think it would have been in like 7th grade. And I think if I'm doing my math correctly, I think the PS2 would have been out by then. In any case, that's my history with it. Corey, throwing it over to you. What's your history with the Dreamcast? How did you kind of first get into it?
Well, I was there from the beginning. I worked at Electronics Boutique, the video game retail store.
Nice.
Mm-hmm. At that point during the launch. But before it came out, I had a coworker who imported one from Japan. And, he just imported the system in Sonic Adventure, and he hooked it up to the TVs in the store to like kind of hype people up to get ready to pre-order it. And I was just amazed going into it. But, like I had this was the first console that released when I was like old enough to like have a job and be able to like just like buy it with like a job. So of course I was going to buy it. Like even though like I grew up a big Sega fan, but like in '92, like when Street Fighter 2 came out, I basically decided like it doesn't matter who makes the system, I want to play like everything if I can.
Mm-hmm.
So I had no console allegiances at that point, and I had skipped over the Saturn at around launch and went with the PlayStation. But when the Dreamcast came out, I was 20 years old, on the verge of becoming 21. So I just I had that income, or I probably was just racking up credit card debt. Free money on credit, on that credit card, right? I hadn't quite learned how to only spend as much as you're like bringing in. Don't just like overdo it. So I worked at Electronics Boutique when it came out. I was there, like on launch day, picked it up the system on launch day, brought it home, messed around like by like downloading the different stuff from Sonic Adventure onto my VMU. Using the modem.
Yeah. Yes.
And it was just I worked at Electronics Boutique all the way through its lifetime, so I got to see like that high of like all this cool stuff coming out, and then I really got to cash in when everything was like $10 or $20.
Yeah,
we're trying to get rid of it. So I don't know. I because of the sign out policy that we had at Electronics Boutique, where we could take the gutted copy home if there was like more copies in the store and like play it for a day. That allowed me to just like check out a whole bunch of stuff that I probably would never have bought like without getting a chance to try it. But yeah, I mean, I was there, Final Fantasy VIII came out the day before, I remember.
Wow.
And
I think it actually came,
is a day or two.
It was the same day.
I think it's the same day.
Sony was like, "Oh shoot, the Dreamcast seems like it's going to do well. We got to try to stop do anything to slow their momentum before our PS2 comes out." So they're like, "Well, let's follow up our most popular game for our system, Final Fantasy VII, and its sequel will be out on the same day. Let's see if that works." Yeah. It didn't. But
maybe that was probably like the official release date, but I know I got it the day before.
Okay.
Like it was, because back then there was no specific release date. It's kind of like whenever you got it in, you'd sell it.
Yeah.
You didn't have to hold it for a street date or anything. So, yeah, I mean, I bought the system with Soul Calibur and Sonic Adventure.
Hell yeah.
And my Sonic Adventure was not defective.
That was a big issue. Yep. A lot of games were defective at launch. Not the systems, but the games, it seems like. There's a lot of defective discs that were there at launch. Now, how many do you still, for those who cannot see the video version of this, how many of those games do you still have in your collection? Did you ever sell off your Dreamcast games, or are they still in your collection back there?
There's certain games that I held on to, like I'm very happy that I've held on to several of the more expensive ones.
Mm-hmm.
But 3 years later, 2003, I guess, or 4 years later, I had finished with college and I just didn't know what to do. So I got an internship out in New York City and I had to raise money to move out there. So I sold a lot of games at that point to kind of raise money to be able to afford that move. But I'm very happy that I kept some of the the real heavy hitters that are expensive now, like Mars Matrix, Skies of Arcadia, stuff like that I got on day one. But Mars Matrix was it was $20 new when it came out.
Wow.
Capcom was just, killed it on that system. Just so many good games.
Oh, it's almost, I think 90% of my 80% of my top games. Okay, wait, no, 70% of my top games are Capcom games. 60%. They didn't make that one too. But yeah, they crushed it up. I think that era is the best Capcom has ever been, and they've been chasing it ever since. And it's been a struggle. It's been a sad to be a Capcom fan.
Though the Resident Evil has been making a renaissance in the last 5-6 years or so.
Yeah, that's true. And Street Fighter 6 is incredible.
Mm-hmm. So Capcom still is doing some stuff that they're still, I think they've been steadily kind of having a little bit of a renaissance more recently, but you mentioned in your story, Corey, about how you skipped over the Saturn, and I think that's a good transition into a bit of the history of the system. And both of you feel free to interject with any observations or thoughts as we go through this. I'm not going to read everything. I have how many pages? I have a little over 2 pages of notes on the history of the Dreamcast. There's a lot that I gleaned from those videos. And what I find interesting about the Dreamcast, I want to get your opinion on both of this before I kind of dive into fun fact land. I almost feel like the development of the system itself is more. It's like there's more of the story of the Dreamcast development is more. I'm trying to phrase this exactly. The story of the Dreamcast development is actually more the story of the Saturn's decline. Of what what Sega Saturn did to Sega and the 32X in turn, like that couple years span. The Dreamcast is very much a reaction to all the follies of what happened between the Sega CD, the Sega 32X, and the Sega Saturn. And to be clear, I'm not trying to insult those systems or fans of those systems. I know there's lots of passionate Saturn fans out there. What is it? Sticka. Yeah. He. I love his hot takes on Twitter about how the Saturn is a better system than the N64, and it's really funny to see how mad people.
Wait, people get. Does he have people debate that?
Oh yeah.
Oh, come on. Saturn is so much better than the N64.
I don't even have a strong opinion on it. I don't know the Saturn's library well enough to be like, oh yeah, he's right, or oh yeah, he's wrong. I just find it funny that people really are really angry about it. I'm like, I personally like the N64 more, but that's only because I played it more. I literally can't even say it's better. I literally don't. I have experience of playing a little bit of Nights into Dreams Nights on the Saturn. But what I find interesting about the Dreamcast is that it really feels like the story of its development is just more tied to the Saturn than it is to its own development, because Sega at the time, when the words of a new 32-bit system, the PlayStation, was coming out, Sega wasn't quite ready with their own just yet, so they wanted to have a stopgap in between the Genesis and their own 32-bit system, which would become the Saturn. I think there was also one called Neptune for a little while. I'm forgetting exactly, but
that's the combination Genesis and 32X.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they released the 32X as a stopgap to basically kind of keep it was supposed to keep attention on them and not on PlayStation, and it ended up just splitting their market a ton, because now you have Sega Genesis owners having to buy a Sega CD or a Sega 32X, which was another expensive peripheral, and that what is it? The 32X came out how many months before the Saturn? It was less than a calendar year.
I want to say 6 months tops.
Yeah. And which is just why that you're not going to lose that much market share in a handful of months. And then on top of that, what hurt them was then obviously the infamous early release of the Saturn. They were planning for a fall release in 1995, and then I think it was 95. I'm going to no. Oh, sorry. Was it 94? Because I think now I should have had this up in front of me, y'all.
I feel like
it's 95. May 11th, 95 is when it came out in North America. It was already out in Japan. And it was supposed to come out in the fall of 95 in North America, and they were scared of the PlayStation coming out in North America, so they're like, well, we're going to beat Sony to the market by a handful of months, and we're going to be able to establish a foothold on the market, and that's how we're going to be able to beat Sony in advance. Well, not only did that not work, it took retailers by surprise. It took developers by surprise. So none of the launch lineup for the Saturn in North America was awful by comparison. I shouldn't say awful. I can't speak to the quality of the games, but
don't say that. It wasn't bad. It was just there just wasn't a lot.
Yes,
what was there was good, but that's just the way that it worked out.
And retailers were pissed off at Sega because now all of a sudden they're not expecting to have this stock in. Consumers weren't ready. People were saving up for money for a fall release date only to have everything drop beforehand. And it didn't work. It completely backfired on them, and it pretty much crippled the Saturn in North America going forward. On top of the previous follies with releasing a 32-bit add-on to their previous system less than a calendar year prior to their actual 32-bit system coming out, which is just going to confuse consumers in terms of marketing. Like, you saw how confused people were with the Wii versus Wii U. Now you have hey, this is Sega's 32-bit system. Well, which one is it? The 32X or the Saturn? Like, consumers, unless they are actively in like the gaming space and they're really passionate about, they're really into gaming in general, they're not going to pay a whole lot of attention to that. Like, all of us, when the Wii U came out, we knew the difference because we are actively like in the community and we're actively following the game industry. But for, grandma buying their grandkid a system and they want the new Sega system, well, you have a 32X and you have the Saturn. And if Junior doesn't have the Genesis, that 32X is just basically a doorstop. So
it pretty much was, even if you had one.
Yeah, was not a whole lot. No, there was not a whole lot. And so, yeah, they that really crippled them. And that kind of informed a lot of the decision-making process for the Dreamcast. Like, put in perspective, the Saturn, when it came out in 1995, like May 11th, 1995, like I said, it sold 80,000 units in the first 4 months. When the PS1 came out on September 9th, 1995, it sold 100,000 units in the first day.
Damn.
And that's like a newcomer to the console scene.
Yeah, right.
Selling that, yeah.
Oof. I knew one person that had a Saturn growing up, and even playing Nights in the Dreams.
They had months of build up.
Yeah.
I guess with the you are not ready and stuff like that.
Yeah, even like my most hardcore gamer friends, and even me, I was a total Sega fanboy. I was like, I don't really want the Sega Saturn. Nights in the Dreams was cool, and I liked Fighting Vipers, but other than that, I feel like it didn't really have many. Panzer Dragoon, maybe, but
yeah, we're talking U.S. Like, there's so much good stuff that, and the system was a big success in Japan.
Yeah,
it was.
But I mean, we are looking at all of this from a U.S. point of view.
Even from a global point of view, if you're looking at total sales, not just sales centric to Japan, which actually the sales differences in consoles in the different regions does play into things, especially with the Dreamcast. It sold really well in North America, and then it didn't sell quite as well in Japan. So Sega really, especially Sega of America, really focused in on the US market trying to gain a foothold, but we'll get to that in just a moment. By 1997, the Saturn controlled only 2% of the entire gaming market, and 12% of the total market belonged to Sega in general. So remember, that is including the remnants of the Sega Genesis and Master System and everything. Sega only controlled about 12% of the market, and 2% of that total share was, or 2% in total of, I'm re-explaining everything. I'm sorry. And 2% belonged to the Saturn. So they had to really shift gears fast to switch over to a new system, to a new system to come out, because the Saturn was pretty much dead in the water. I would go more into that, but like, this is a Dreamcast episode, so I'm just kind of laying the groundwork here for the Dreamcast. Like, we're not focusing as the Saturn goes into that, sets up the Dreamcast, but we don't really need to focus too much more, because now we get to the Dreamcast, and not only did all the crap that happened before hinder Sega, but also the development of the Dreamcast hindered Sega, because there was 2 different teams developing the system at the same time, and neither of them knew about each other. There was a North American team and there was a Japanese team, and neither of them had any idea the other existed. The one, and actually Chris's video from Classic Gaming Quarterly made it sound like Sega of Japan had no idea Sega of America was even working on a successor to the Saturn. I don't know if that's actually what happened. I don't know if like Sega of Japan directed 2 different teams and just said, hey, you 2 do research and we'll pick which one we like more. Do you have any idea, Corey?
I don't know for sure, but I feel like they were definitely not getting along at that point.
Yeah, and what was
that wouldn't surprise me at all, that they were like just kind of doing their own thing, you know, the best that they can, you know, or at least Sega USA, Sega of America was just like, we're going to do this. You know, it's like the whole, like, it's better to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission.
Yeah,
So.
and they had already been, I believe we had a very similar story towards the end of the Saturn, and probably contributed to the fall of the Saturn was they had, what was this? There was going to be a Sonic game.
Oh yeah,
the Sonic Extreme.
Sonic Extreme, thank you. Yeah, but they had 2 separate teams working on it. I think in the same vein as the, you know, Sega of America was working on some things, Sega of Japan was working on some things, and they were not communicating. And when they were, I believe there was one case of one team was actually on an older build or something, or something happened and they had to start from scratch basically, and they were just like, well, all of this is a total failure, it's a wash, we're gonna have to call it, and it never came out, and it looked really weird. Seeing early footage of it, I was like, it's probably a good thing this game never came out, because it'll hurt your brain.
Well, the narrative for a long time was that Sega of Japan was constantly trying to dick over Sega of America, and Sega of America was the one that knew what they had their fingers on the pulse. They knew what was going on. There's been some recent discoveries. I don't know if I can't remember the specifics. I saw it on Twitter a couple months ago about
like their fiscal year thing.
Yeah,
like
it showed that
retailers.
That's what it was. It was their fiscal years. They weren't doing nearly as well as it seemed to be. And they hadn't been doing well for a while. Like even back into, I think, when the Genesis was still really popular, right? Like they weren't doing well even back then.
Yeah, Pandemonium reviews every Sega Saturn game. The YouTube channel has a great video on going through those numbers and what they mean, and about how 32X they had to like retailers were just like scrapping them because they couldn't sell them. They were just like junking them.
Jeez.
Yep. It really that 32X really crippled them a lot more than I think a lot of people realize, not just in terms of splitting a market share, but just from the bottom line even. So they had a switch. The American side was working with an American tech company called 3DFX, and the Japanese side was working with Hitachi as kind of like their base tech companies to help design the nuts and bolts of the system. The code name for the American project was called Black Belt, and the code name for the Japanese team was Doral, or the Japanese project was called Doral. Doral was chosen by Sega of Japan, and once that was the one they focused on, they switched the code name to codename Katana. That led to a whole bunch of issues, though, because they had signed contracts with these companies. So when they broke off the contract with 3DFX, they got sued by 3DFX. And 3DFX was doing really, really well at the time. They had just gone public on the stock market. And during the announcement for that, that's when they announced, without Sega telling them to, that they were working with Sega on the system, and Sega of Japan was not happy about that that early announcement, and that's what caused them to scrap. Well, it's one of the reasons, I should say. I shouldn't say the sole reason, but one of the reasons they cut off the contract with them, and then in turn 3DFX sued them, and it was settled, eventually being settled out of court. And ditching 3DFX also hurt them additionally in third-party support initially, because EA Games was invested. They had a large investment in 3DFX, And on top of that, because they got burned on the Saturn, they were kind of like wishy-washy on supporting the Dreamcast, which in turn created the Sega Sports division because EA was no longer bringing their sports games over to the Dreamcast. So that's where you have Sega Sports come around with the 2K games and everything. So it, in a weird way, it kind of worked out because it's a pretty iconic brand, you know?
Yeah.
It is now, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, didn't 2K become like they got bought, or was it Visual Concepts became 2K games,
something
right?
like that. I didn't follow that rabbit hole too far. I just know that 2K Sports was Sega's sports brand, and then now 2K is its own giant company,
Yeah.
or owned by someone else.
2K Sports. It's in the game.
Enrage all the sports fans out there.
Now you've done it.
Yep.
EA Sports. It's in the game. Actually, shout out to this is a tangential thing. Shout out to friends of the show, Mike and Neil from the Unlocking What Was Cool podcast. Their show used to be called The GameCube Was Cool, and they actually got to interview the dude who did like the in-arena announcer voice for the EA NHL games. Like when you hear the in-arena announcers being like, "Someone please move your car" type of thing. Like they interviewed that guy.
That's cool. I want to interview the guy, the guy from NBA Jam. Boom shakalaka.
Oh, Tim Kutzrow?
Oh yeah.
Kutzrow? I
Is that
actually
his
saw
name?
him in person.
Oh, that's so sick.
Yeah.
I bet he's so tired of saying that.
No, he's definitely not.
Really?
No, absolutely not.
No.
That's awesome.
No. He like goes to conventions. I mean, I've last October I was at a convention with him, and we hung out with him afterwards and like had beers with him and like the actors from Mortal Kombat.
Yo, which one?
Dan Pacina
Yo.
and his brother.
Carlos.
Yeah, Carlos Pacina.
Yeah.
And it's like has no relevance at all to the Dreamcast.
That's dope.
But he goes to these conventions and he has this microphone. He has a speaker on it, so he like can talk and like do like announces and stuff. And he gets like he always has a machine at his booth, and he gets behind it and does like live commentary and stuff.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's pretty great.
He was at.
He's definitely not saying. He's definitely not sick of saying that.
That's
stuff.
so funny. I
mean,
I made an assumption and I was very wrong. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to this man.
I'm sorry, Timmy. Timmy, come on the show.
I'm sorry, Timmy. I know you're watching right now.
He's being called Timmy.
He's a real stylish dude too.
Yeah.
He's like
yeah.
He's just like he's very well dressed all the time.
Nice. That's how I felt about we're getting into the weeds a bit, but Cam Newton. No.
The football player?
Oh my God. No, not Cam Newton. Why would I go football first? Liquid Snake.
Cam Clark.
Cam Clark. Thank you. I don't know why I went there first. I met David Hayter and Cam Clark, and they were both great and very gracious. And Cam Clark knows how to dress.
I wish I knew how to dress. Anyway, yeah.
Me too.
Welcome back to the Fashion and Gaming Podcast.
For the Sega Dreamcast fashion show starring Yu Suzuki.
Who are your
and,
most well-dressed voice actors out there?
Ooh.
I don't know.
But some other quick hits on the Sega Dreamcast. The system was developed in tandem with Sega's new arcade structure called the Naomi, which is why you saw a lot of arcade ports, which is what you mentioned before, Andrew, how a lot of classic arcade games came over. It used GD-ROMs as the discs, and that was actually proprietary. That was proprietary. It was a proprietary format because they were afraid of piracy, which CD-ROMs were easily pirated because you could get a CD burner. Even if they were expensive at the time, you could still do it. GD-ROMs you couldn't do that with, at least not easily. So it held up to I think it was like 1.2 gigabytes of data.
That was a lot for the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. And it had that little ring in the middle that it had CD-ROM data in there. You can put in your computer, and sometimes you'd have like wallpapers for your desktop.
Yeah, or listen to the soundtrack.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that actually, those CDs, the GD-ROMs were made in partnership with Yamaha, which I had no idea it was a partnership to create that proprietary software. And yeah, so the Dreamcast originally released in Japan on November 27th, 1998, and obviously the iconic release date of 9/9/1999. And what was it? It was for like $199, right? I think was the price. It was like
it's $199, which is pretty insane, honestly. That that I mean, they really pulled out all the stops to make this a success. And I mean, for a good, year, it really was a big success.
Yeah. And I
Wasn't
think
it
it's what
cheaper
makes
than the...
And then they revealed the PS2, and it was like all right,
everything went downhill.
Yeah.
And they knew the PS2 was coming because the PS2 was announced, I want to say, in like 1998 or something like that. And the specs were already released, and they were already, like, the Dreamcast was already inferior compared to the specs that got announced in 1998. Their big hope was that they could, since they were coming out earlier than the PS2 by like at least a year or so, actually PS2 came out in North America in October, so it was about a year-ish or so. They were hoping to build up a big enough foothold in the market to be able to kind of weather the storm. And they got off to a rough start, not because it sold poorly, but because there was a chip shortage for the Japanese release, and they couldn't sell as many as they wanted to. The demand was high; it was there, but there was a chip shortage. And the one of the higher ups at Sega, I forget exactly who said it, but they estimated they could have sold like another like 200 to 300,000 units within that first couple of weeks if it had not been for the chip shortage. And it sold 450,000 in the first few weeks, so it wasn't like bad, but.
Jeez.
How
does that work for Nintendo and not Sega? Like, I worked at GameStop when the first Wii came out, and there was a shortage of those, and people were there every single day looking for those things, and that built up the mystique.
Because of bowling.
Yeah, I know. People just really needed to bowl. I just gotta play
literally
tennis.
Because of bowling, and that is it.
Yeah.
Wii Sports, man. Well, also remember, Andrew, though, Nintendo's place, even though it was struggling when the Wii came out because it had, the N64 and the GameCube didn't do quite as well as they were hoping they would. Sega was in a much worse spot, so they couldn't afford that minor hit. Like, that would be a minor hit for most other publishers right now, or console manufacturers, but like for Sega, they were already like hemorrhaging money. They were selling the system at a loss, so they needed more systems to sell so more people could buy games, and the attach rate was not what they were hoping it would be. It's really a damn shame. Because like you said, Corey, once the PS2 came out, that was pretty much like there's two sides for this failure of the Dreamcast, and even though the Dreamcast was a success in terms of the games that came out for it are great. The system sold really well, all things considering, but the nail in the coffin, the reason it ultimately failed, well, sort of, it's a weird thing, is because the Saturn, like we mentioned before, and then the PS2, it's the two sides of the coin. Yeah. That's what happened. And in 22 months, the Sega Dreamcast sold 6.5 million units. That's fantastic, right? That's a little shy of 2 years. In 15 months, so almost 7 months shorter than that, PS2 sold 10 million. Like, wow. It just didn't stand a chance. It really,
and it was like double the price at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Like, I mean, the Dreamcast was probably $150. It may have even been $99 at that point. And the PS2 was $299.
That's wild. I have to believe the PS2 is more at fault than the Sega Saturn, and I'm not saying that just because I'm a Sega fanboy.
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't think it's like a 50-50. I think it's mostly because I even remember like the 32X came out, and the Sega CD came out, and the Sega Saturn came out, and me as a major Sega fanboy at the time, more so than I am now, I was like, these are not great systems. Like, there's nothing to play for any of these. Like, and all my friends were like, so is that the end of Sega? And then the Dreamcast came out, and we were like, oh my god, Sega's back. It's so I don't think it was as much of a like people had lost faith in Sega. I just think the biggest thing was just that piss poor release window. It was just a bad time. It was the right thing at the wrong time.
Yep.
Everyone that were torn, we're going to wait for the PS2.
Right.
And, like, I knew a lot of people that waited for a PS2 because it was after the run that the PS1 had, there's just no way that people that like that system were not going to jump on the PS2 day one, basically. And I mean, it's even, remains the same now because the PS2, although Switch is very close to passing, it's still like the best selling console of all time.
Mhm.
Yep. And like PS1, for put in perspective, sold 102 million units, 102.49 according to Wikipedia million units. That's technically more than the Wii, and the Wii was insanely popular as well, as we know. Like it is really bonkers to see that. So like, yeah, the hype for the PS2 was real, and on top of that, the PS2 had a weaker launch lineup than the Dreamcast by like a decent amount. So it really was just like, it was I think you're right, Andrew. I misrepresented it. I meant the two reasons for the failure of the Dreamcast are those two things, the Saturn and the PS2, but the PS2 is 100% more, I shouldn't say 100%, it is much more at fault. It's like, definitely way over 50% more at fault for that, because on top of that, DVD technology, that's the other half of it. They forgoed putting DVD playability in the Dreamcast, probably because it was either too expensive or I think Sony owned the DVD, right? Didn't they come up with the DVD technology, or they worked on it?
I don't think they came up with DVD. I think it was.
No, I can double check on that.
No, because Sony came up with Blu-ray.
That's what it was.
And there was HD DVD. So was it Toshiba?
It developed.
Maybe that came up with
There's 4 companies credited for the development, at least according to Wikipedia. This is all some quick research, but Sony is one of them, but also so is Panasonic, Philips, and Toshiba. So I don't know.
Okay.
I would have to do more research on that, but that was kind of like you said, Andrew, that was the nail in the coffin. That's what sealed the Dreamcast's fate. But I don't want to focus necessarily all on the doom and gloom of the Dreamcast dying after only a handful of years, because that's not what people remember about it. I wanted to go through the history aspect, and that's a very brief history. There's a lot more details that you can go into with this system. There's so much more, but like, that's just stuff that I personally found a little interesting. I think is like a good timeline of the events, sort of, without going date by date. A discontinuation of it was announced on January 31st, 2001. So they switched gears and focused on producing games for their consoles. Crazily enough, though, I did not know this, and I think I saw this from the Matt McMuscles video. Sega almost went completely belly up. It wasn't that they were like getting out of the console business. They were doing so poorly, they were going to go fully bankrupt. They were going to just dissolve and be gone.
Yeah, I believe it.
The only reason they did not do that is because the company that owned a majority stake in Sega was a company called CSK Holdings. And the chairman of that company, Isao Okawa, personally lent them $500 million of his own money to pay off any existing debts. And then on his deathbed, which I think he died of cancer like relatively shortly after the discontinuation of the Dreamcast, like it was in the early 2000s, he forgave them of the loan and then gifted them back the shares of the stock that he was holding, which valued $695 million.
Holy crap. What a hero.
He's the reason we still have Sega today. Like, that dude on his deathbed, I don't know what reasons. I would love to see. I'd be very curious if anyone has written about it.
He really, really liked Altered Beast.
I mean, who doesn't?
I was about to make a really dark joke about rising from the grave, but
I think you mean
so that's the Dreamcast, man. That's kind of like it in a nutshell. But like I said, I want to talk about the positives, not just the sadness that it went away, but we're here to celebrate the system, not just talk about it from merely just going through, here's a timeline. Let's talk about some of the stuff that we love about it. I'm going to just start off with this real quick, and I want to get both of your thoughts on it. I think the most charming thing about the Dreamcast, besides the 4 controller ports, that was always a welcome thing, because that's like almost in response to the N64. They wanted to make it as like a party system type of thing.
Right.
The VMUs.
Yeah.
I think that is one of the coolest things in the entire, like, don't get me wrong, the Dreamcast could go online. One of the first systems ever to, like, not the first system to be able to do that, but the first to do it out of the box. that I'm aware of at least. Can you think of any, Corey, that did it out of the box prior to the Dreamcast?
No, but I want to say one of the things I love about the Dreamcast, or about the VMU specifically, is that beep it makes when your battery's dead every time you power the system up. Love it. And about how it just eats up those batteries whether or not you're using it, and even if you put brand new batteries in it, it's going to like drain them anyways.
I always thought that beep just happened regardless. I never knew until this very moment that was because the internal battery is dead. That's so funny. Because it's become an iconic sound. Every time I power up the Dreamcast, it goes beep. It's just so it's satisfying to me. And then you hear the and you see the logo come on.
Well, you hear the loud fan in it.
Oh my gosh, the thing is so
and like the loud. I mean, it's listen. Like I love the look of the system.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I just love the style of it. I love like the fact that it's like a white system, and the whites and grays. I love the orange swirly logo, or blue swirly logo if you're in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. Like I just felt like they really nailed it, like aesthetically. Just like as a device that you wanted to buy, or wanted to play.
Yeah.
You know, it almost like looked like an arcade machine, like almost looks like arcade hardware in a way.
Yeah, I think the Dreamcast,
and compared to like say even the PS2, like PS1 was kind of blocky, PS2 is like really blocky. I just feel as though the Dreamcast, like the design of the system really holds up, and it was really nice, especially at the time, to get a system that was not just like coming in black.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah. I still think it's my favorite console aesthetically, with a close second being the GameCube. I'm still so mad that it's the only white console on my shelf of all black consoles. I'm like, I want it to be all one or the other. My undiagnosed OCD hates that. But
you can buy the Sega Sports version of the Dreamcast, and you'll get it.
But then you got to have the
shell.
big Sega Sports logo.
Yeah, I think I'll pass on that one. But it was so iconic that it became a visual part of character designs in one of my top favorite games, which we'll get to. I don't want to jump into that now, but all of the characters in one of my favorite Dreamcast fighting games have a Sega Dreamcast on them.
Oh, I thought you were going to be you're talking about Typing of the Dead, where they all are wearing them on their backs. No. the keyboard floating in front of them.
Well, God. See, this is why I'm happy I have you both on this episode, because one of the things that I love about this podcast is I can explore blind spots in my own gaming, in my own gaming history or experience or backlog. And I've never beaten a Dreamcast game. Like that's one of the reasons I try to be even now. I've never beaten one all the way through. I played like 30 hours of Skies of Arcadia, got stuck on something, and then I never got around to beating, but I played a lot of it. But like I love hearing all these things, because I'm learning more about the system that I'm genuinely interested in. I don't have a lot of experience with it. I know it's a little bit of a tangent, but I really love this part of the podcast where I get to kind of like what you do over in your thing, Andrew, of like the experience point where you get to share your experiences. That's kind of what's happening here. I get to hear all your experiences, something that I've talked about it before, misplaced nostalgia. I'm nostalgic for something that I didn't actually personally get to experience.
Nice.
It's like synthwave music.
Yeah. I'm very, that is big misplaced nostalgia for me. I love synthwave music.
Like it just, I mean, I like it because of, like I lived during that time, but also, I just think it's really funny seeing a lot of people saying, oh, this makes me nostalgic for something that I was not alive to experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I was gonna say back, in terms of the Dreamcast, like nostalgic for something I didn't get to experience. One thing, I mean, I experienced a little bit as a kid, like I said, but one thing I love about this system, and I feel like this has been a thing with Sega ever since, like for a while, like when they were making consoles, they always find unique ways for you to interact with your system. Whether it's the Sega channel back on the Sega Genesis, whether it's the add-ons with like the like all the extra peripherals you get for the Genesis, even the power base converter, which lets you play Master System games on your Genesis. And then with the Dreamcast, I mentioned the VMU. That is such a unique idea, how like you have little mini games on this little LCD screen that you can just, it saves your game and then you can pop it out and take it with you on the go and play games, because it's got its own little D-pad and own little buttons that you can use to play games. Like, what other system does that? None. Like, that is such a cool idea. And on top of that, when you have it plugged into your controller, depending on what game you're playing, you'll see a little like art appear on, like you'll see little graphics appear on there. Playing Sonic Adventure or Skies of Arcadia. And Sonic Adventure, they used that a lot with the Chow Gardens, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of functionality.
Yeah, I didn't touch that stuff really that much. To be honest, like I just didn't. Or maybe because my battery was off.
I was gonna say that's kind of part of the experience too. Is I didn't know until like I was reminded and watching some retrospectives of this console that it could pop out and you could actually play it without it being plugged in. Mm-hmm. I didn't remember that. I think everyone's batteries must have already been dead by the time I was playing them as a kid.
Yeah. But it takes two of the CR2032s.
Jeez.
Yeah, like stack them against each other. It's
that's wild.
It's a bit much.
I like the concept of in Skies of Arcadia that you can like, there's like a treasure hunting mini game or something that you can, when you find items, you can then transfer it back to your save.
Yeah.
And then the main game, that's cool.
How do you guys feel about the controller on the system though in general?
Ooh. I have a lot of feelings about the controller.
I don't hate it. I think it actually feels comfy to hold. I think the joystick feels. Does the joystick? Maybe it's just my controller because I bought it secondhand. It's just a hard plastic joystick, right? There's no like rubber protection thing for your thumb, right?
No, there's no grips.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I don't like that, but I like how it feels, like ergonomically in my hands, it feels really nice. I like the triggers on the left and right side. I like the button placement overall, and I like how it looks. The fact that the cord is on the bottom is a little weird, but you can like bend it to the front and clip it into the little thing at the front of
that
the
little notch.
Controller. Yeah, which it's cute, but it's like, why not just put it at the front?
Why would you? Yeah.
But for the VMU, I guess you kind of they use that space. But yeah. So Andrew, what are your thoughts on the controller?
Well, I'm surprised to hear you say that you actually liked it, because normally when I say that I like the controller, people are like, "What the hell are you talking about? It's awful." I think I like it because like I have big hands, so like I'm also the guy who still likes the original Xbox controller, the Duke, the Whale as it's called, and it's basically just kind of the predecessor to that. Like it's got the same kind of outward concave edges, same button placement, and I think buttons in general, the ABXY. The only thing that I always wanted to have is a second joystick, and I realized that wasn't a thing until the PS2, I believe. But
the DualShock was out, and so was like the dual analog.
Oh yeah, I guess it was for the PS1.
On the PS1.
But... Yeah. So playing certain games, I'm like, I wish I had another analog to move. Like there's an empty space there that I'm like, I just want to move the camera like that. But yeah, like you said, Josh, like the buttons feel good, the triggers feel good. Especially, I mean, you can even play like fighting games pretty well on it, because a lot of pads are awful.
It has
for
a good
fighting
D-pad
games.
on it.
Yeah, the D-pad's not great for that, but the analog is good for it if you're doing.
Oh, I think the D-pad is pretty good on the Dreamcast controller, but
I guess it depends on. I tend to use the stick for. Capcom fighting games are infamous for the quarter circles, which are harder to do on D-pads. But yeah, overall, it's solid. It's so light though; like it feels like it would be
very light.
Garbage.
Well,
you're like picking it up and you're like, this thing's gonna fall apart, and then you're playing it for hours and hours, and you're like, actually, this feels really nice.
Well, I think if people are complaining about how games control, that speaks more to the design of the game than to the controller itself, because the controller itself is responsive, at least whenever I've played it, as long as it's a functioning controller. It's the same thing. People shit all over the N64 controller. It's not a bad controller. It's weird looking, but if you hold it in your hand, it's comfortable. It's a comfortable controller to hold. It's just popular to make fun of it. And with the Dreamcast, it's comfortable to hold. The buttons are in good places. Now, if the games don't control well, that's on the designers for not utilizing the limitations of taking the limitations of the controller into account. Like people, the GameCube, for example, like Smash Brothers Melee, you can't people still play Smash Brothers with a GameCube controller because it was designed so perfectly around that button scheme that people still play Smash with that controller. So if your game designers are designing their games around the limitations of the controller, which you should be doing it, especially if you're making a console exclusive game, like there was a lot of Sega exclusive, like Sega developed games exclusively for the Dreamcast. So if there's any issues with control, they just didn't make the best choice in terms of designing around the limitations of the controller. I don't have any examples to give of that. Like I said, I'm not as well versed in the Dreamcast library as I would like to be. I've played Sonic Adventure, have not beaten it. Played Skies of Arcadia, have not beaten it. I have played Typing of the Dead at a friend's house, and I actually own a Dreamcast keyboard somewhere over here. So I can get a copy of Typing of the Dead, and I can actually play it because I got a Dreamcast keyboard because I kind of really want to. It's a lot of fun. But
great.
So I say all that to say I can't give you any specific examples of games that don't control well, but if they aren't, to me that's not a failing of the controller, it's a failing of of thinking ahead with the design.
Yeah. I mean, I think the controller is fine. It's a iteration on the Saturn 3D pad, which was very similar, but they just that has a very big and almost like kind of flat analog stick on it. But other than that, they're very, very, very similar. I just felt like the analog stick, especially like in Sonic Adventure, it's very hard just to go straight, like just to hold up and go. I don't know. I think that's why I had such a hard time with it with Sonic Adventure, is because I feel like I was always going back and forth and weaving back and forth unintentionally.
Does it have the notches? I'm trying to look at. I have one, but it's across the room.
It has no notches.
Okay, that's probably why.
And the stick, it has no like rubber or anything on it, but if you mess with it a little bit, it kind of turns a little bit in place, just to so that I don't know. I think they probably felt that gives you like more leeway on your control or on your movement, but I don't know. I think it's fine, but I'll tell you one thing: like if it annoys you at all, I highly recommend getting a blue retro receiver for the system, which just came out from I think Retro Time, and you can connect any Bluetooth controller, including, and it feels very, very good, is like Xbox One controllers.
Wow.
Okay.
And then you can set that right analog stick to be like your ABXY at the same time, and you can do like dual stick on certain games, like especially good for like a game like Bangai-O, which uses like the left stick to move, and you can shoot in 8 directions by using the buttons. But if you just swap that over to the stick, it feels great.
Nice. I've got for those not watching live, I've got a twin stick, Dreamcast twin stick right here, ready to talk about for once we talk about specific games.
About some Voot.
Yeah, talk about Voot.
Well, we'll go into the games in just a moment. Last thing I want to touch on before we go into games is just a couple more peripherals. So there was going to be a light gun made by Sega, and there was one that came out in Japan. They did not release it over here in North America because shortly after, or shortly before they were going to, Columbine happened, and so they're like, we're not going to do that. We're not going to we're not going to do that. So there was a Mad Catz version. I don't know how good it was, but there was a Mad Catz version of the light gun. One thing I did look up that I thought was like really interesting that I did not know exists. The serial port in the back, there was a link cable for the Dreamcast that I guess I would assume is for multiplayer.
Neo Geo Pocket.
And yes,
you
Neo Geo Pocket.
Neo Geo Pocket, yeah. Just like that Sonic game or whatever.
It was for a lot of SNK games too, since they made the Neo Geo Pocket. But you could connect your SNK games to the Neo Geo. I guess they would send data to each other. I don't know what in terms of gameplay that did, but it's kind of cool that you could do that. It was a completely different manufacturer, but you could do it.
What's like really quick, I want to touch back on the light gun. What's kind of fascinating about that is the light guns are actually region protected as well.
Oh,
what?
So like I have no idea how they or why they managed to do that, but Sega didn't release their first party ones here, so you can only get a like a Mad Catz or Interact.
So you couldn't even import
one and use it
a
on
first party one. It wouldn't even work. Wow. They're like, we can
you
tell you're American. We know you want to take this into a school.
You would have to import a Japanese Dreamcast then in order to get a Japanese light gun to work. Then I would assume.
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of wild that they decided to do that. At
first, I was thinking like, okay, can they tell by the TV technology? Because maybe it just wouldn't work because like. What is it? In Europe they have different standards than we had NTSC and they had their whatever the standard was over in the PAL regions. I forget what it was.
PAL.
Was it PAL? Okay, there we go.
Yeah, you just said it.
But then I remembered, Japan also used NTSC, so it couldn't be the same video standard. Or so
I think it wasn't NTSC-J.
Yeah, but it was still like there's a reason why you can do a lot like the systems. Like they have the same outputs. I mean, you would know better than I would, Cora. I'm not wrong with that, right? Like basically they had the same video standard in Japan and North America, right?
Yeah. I mean, all these games supported, they had S-Video and I mean, obviously no component, but it was, the VGA was supported. But, like I say this a lot and I just want to kind of touch even just on this really quick because I think that at the time it was impressive is that even with a composite signal like going into a CRT at the time, my impression of seeing games running completely in 480i, which is like that's what it would normally be just plugged into a CRT, and coming from a like a PS1 that's in Saturn had like high res modes. But mostly it was 240p. But seeing these games, like a game like Sonic Adventure, running in 480i, like to my eyes at that time, it may as well have been HD.
Mm-hmm.
It looked so crisp and clear that I was like, I don't even know what's going on here. Why does it look so much better?
Yeah.
Like I didn't understand what was even going on and why there was like what it meant to be like a higher resolution or to, output in 480i. It just, it looked like, seeing 1080p for the first time.
I don't think
weird.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Weirdly enough. No, it's
I was going to say, I don't think there's ever going to be quite as large of a leap in graphical fidelity in terms of 3D gaming, I should say, between the PS1/N64 era and then the Dreamcast and up. Just like, don't get me wrong, like you can see a pretty decent difference between PS2 and PS3 and original Xbox and 360 and so on and so forth, but that gap I don't feel is nearly as far as what the the previous early 3D games, the 32-bit consoles up to the 128 bits. Like that was just it was such a crazy difference. I know this isn't
in literally 4 years.
It's bonkers. It is,
and it's crazy. Like the PS5 alone has been out for 4 years for that amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
And we're in an era of
and they jump from
diminishing returns right now.
It's just it'll never happen in that same way again. And the quicker we come to terms with that it's just not possible.
Yeah,
like the happier we'll be. I think.
Well, that's what that could. Oh man, I could go on a whole conversation.
Me
about
too.
that.
I was about to start going. I was like, "What? Nope, never mind. Dreamcast."
Yeah, But like, I still remember. It's not a Dreamcast game, but I still remember seeing Medal of Honor Frontline for the first time on the PS2 and just seeing the graphical fidelity on that, and just being it's a joke now. Like whenever you see the first game that blows your mind in terms of graphics, your first thought is most likely like, "Oh my god, graphics will never be better than this." And then give it like 2 years and it's better. Though now there's a good argument graphics may not be better than it's going to get marginally better, but so
with people getting more and more insane and going crazy and losing their jobs over it now. For I don't know. Like you said, it's a conversation for another time. But I think that we are well past the point of like, this is good enough. Let's just like be all right with what we have.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Can we have art direction again? That's the only thing I'm going to say about this is like, I feel all new games come out and I'm like, okay, like every game is just trying to be hyper realistic but they all end up kind of looking the same. Like watching Game Awards trailers and stuff, I'm like, okay, was that the one with the this, or was that the one with the this, or which high fantasy ridiculous, adventure game is action RPG is this going to be? I don't like, they all look the same because they're all just trying to be super high fidelity. And like that era, the reason that this era, to tie it back into the Dreamcast, why the like original Xbox, GameCube, PS2, Dreamcast era, because I put that in that same group. Why that's my favorite era is because they weren't afraid to play around and they could just have fun. It was experimental. It was like, it wasn't the first era of 3D, but it was the second one. So they had perfected a lot of the weirdness and they could.
It's like going from, like 8-bit to 16-bit, where they like, that's arguably where, developers learned to perfect 2D.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then they could have fun with it and make some like real weird stuff. All my top games, aside from maybe one, are very weird, and I love it.
Well, and speaking of games, Andrew, I think that is a perfect time to talk about some of our favorite games for the Dreamcast. And I don't really have a lot to say on this. Like I've been talking about before, a lot of the games that I would say that I have played, I'm pretty sure are on your list, Andrew. And if they aren't, I'll shout one out at the end, but like, or at least on one of your lists, because I only know a lot of the popular ones. I do have, my brother gave me, I don't even remember the name of the game. Oh my gosh, there's a game called like Ooga Booga or Unga.
Not Floygan Brothers.
Floygan
Brothers.
I don't know.
There is one called like Unga Bunga or something like that.
Yeah, it's Unga Bunga. He gave me that sealed. I still have that sealed, so I haven't played that. That's the only one I can think of that, which I don't even have an experience with, but I might as well just shout it out because I owned a sealed copy of it. But
that's so funny. I wonder if that's worth anything.
I don't know. I think I looked it up. It wasn't worth a lot, but in any case, I want to throw it over to both of you. Andrew, we'll start with you since you've been alluding to your list of 10 games. Corey, not saying you have to also come up with a list of 10, just any that pop into your mind. We can just kind of free flow through this conversation. And
I want to hear these top 10 games. Yeah, I can comment on them.
Let's do that. Yeah. So Andrew, let's hear them.
All right, cool. So yeah, I don't know if you guys have a set 10, but I am some flavor of neurodivergent, so I love making lists. So my top 10, like I alluded to before, most of them, actually, I looked into it, and half of them are Capcom fighting games. Some of them are fighting games not by Capcom, but because this era was like, this is where they perfected bringing the arcade home. That's there isn't anything. The experience that I got from the Dreamcast that I love the most is that arcade feel. So that's kind of going to be the flavor of all of these. So at number 10, I have, and I'm surprised that this is so low, Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. It's still the best Street Fighter game. It's one of the best looking pixel art games of all time. And up until the very short-lived, I think, PS3 online edition, it still somewhat holds up as one of the best iterations of the game that is still played in competitive, because it's based off of the arcade, because they used the arcade chip.
I mean, that's true for a lot of these games.
Yeah.
I'm sure that we'll find. Yeah, I mean, Street Fighter 3 is great, and in all three Street Fighter 3 games came out. What was the new generation, and then what is it, Double Impact? Like those were included in its own package before Third Strike.
Yeah, I think like all three were. Maybe it was like only two, but you might be right. Maybe all three.
Yeah, the new challengers and the Second Impact or whatever was like in its own. Was its own release, came out before Third Strike came out.
Right,
but Third Strike is great. I mean, it's a gorgeous game. It's still like like the clothing in that
Yeah.
is just like the movement of the clothing just looks, it's unbelievable. And that's like arguably like I think that anybody who cares about Street Fighter 3, like they really only care about Third Strike.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's the only one that's ever talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And because it took them a little while they were afraid to go to 3, and then I think it was Third Strike that even like introduced like parrying.
Yeah, that's the big mechanic of that, that's kind of what made it the most famous.
Defines it.
Yeah, for sure.
For sure.
It's a close second to that one is I do like the Alpha series, like Street Fighter Alpha 3 is cool, but I just really like how it's almost like a little too far into like the anime aspect. But then Third Strike, I think, has that like really nailed down to where it is very anime, but it still feels like more grounded. Like you said, with the clothing animation, every time you see like Ryu and Ken throw a fireball and their bandanas just blow behind them, and like Ken's baggy pants, because I played him a lot. Like just the way everybody moves, like it looks like think about Elena and like doing her like dance attacks. Like it looks like rotoscoped or something. Like the animation is almost like too good to be real.
And what I think is, I guess Third Strike is not a good example of this, but just I guess Street Fighter 3 in general is that like it took a lot of balls to like only bring back Ryu and Ken,
right?
And, like bring no other characters until like Third Strike brought in Chun-Li, but that was it. Like that's like a ballsy thing to do.
Yeah, it's weird too because they're like, well, you don't have Guile, but you have this kid named Remy who has his exact same moves, but like slightly different. So it's like, why wouldn't you just? Okay, that's fine.
But they took it as like a challenge.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's one of the roster is, I think, the weakest part of that game. And unfortunately, I think that's what is one thing that keeps me going back to Alpha, because I'm a Cody player, so him not being in Third Strike just makes me really sad. But all the old favorites being in that like hyper anime style in the Alpha series was really cool. And
Oh yeah, Alpha 2 is probably my favorite after Street Fighter 2 Champion.
Okay, nice. All right. I will go Josh, unless you have any.
Fighting games are my weakest area of expertise. Andrew, you and I have had we chat. Well, I think it was like 2 Talk Tuesdays ago.
Yeah.
So we couldn't do our Talk Tuesday last week due to technical issues. So I guess it was 3 weeks ago now. I went on like a mini rant about why I can't get into fighting games, in which, just to be clear, listeners who were not privy to that rant, it's of no fault of fighting games. It's because I'm bad at them. Simple enough. Simple as that. I'll figure it out at some point. But go on, Andrew, for your next next game. Excuse me.
Yeah, I was laughing because I was like, when you were like, I bet we'll have a lot of the same games on our list. I was like, I bet you we won't. I know that we won't, because they're all fighting games.
I have like 2 that 3. There might be the only one I'm going to guess it is Skies of Arcadia on your list anywhere.
No, but only because. So if I had to make a list, I put this into number 11, and the only reason of that is because, and I hate to say this because I own it, and for the video viewers, I'm holding it up right now. I've never played it, and that is like one of my greatest sins of all time, because Sky Pirates, hello.
Yeah, that's your aesthetic, man.
It's my aesthetic. It's one of my aesthetics, like second to like techno, like tech, urban ninja techwear stuff, and I don't know. I'll get around to it. I wanted to play it, but then I found out that there was a somewhat superior version on the GameCube, and I was like, well, maybe I'll just play that one instead.
Don't
No?
Don't do it. Play the.
You already own the original anyway.
Like fitting it onto a single GameCube disc, like they had to lower the bit rate for the music.
Oh.
Nobody ever talks about this. Like, yes, they added some content into the GameCube version, but the music takes a noticeable hit.
Really?
And I mean, Skies of Arcadia is like easily my favorite game on the system.
Oh wow!
It's like it is in my top 5 of all time. I love Skies of Arcadia.
Wow.
And when I played it I was so excited to play it again on the GameCube. I got like Legends the day it came out, and immediately I heard the music, and I'm like, This does not sound nearly as bad. I didn't understand what was happening at the time, but now it's just because, they had to, it's encoded at a lower bit rate on the disc to fit on there. and it, because it's a 2 GD-ROM game, and I think it's a 1-disc game on the GameCube, which is like 1.5 gigabytes. That's what the GameCube discs were.
Yeah.
I'm surprised they didn't split that up like it did for like Tales of Symphonia or Resident Evil.
They should have. And if they had fixed that music, then that would have made a big difference. But immediately I was like, no, I don't think I can do this, because I love that soundtrack. The soundtrack is absolutely one of my favorites of all time, much like the game. And like I spent $120 to get a real non bootleg soundtrack for it at the time.
Wow.
This is like
okay.
After, I mean, it's just like yes, it has a high encounter rate.
Yeah.
But just, it hits a lot of the same feelings of, like of innocence and going on an adventure that I loved it so much in Lunar and Grandia.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Just like not a lot of games have that feeling of like, innocent adventure, and then suddenly shit gets real.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh geez, now we're like into something that we don't know how to deal with.
Well,
I mean that's my number one game on this.
Yeah, I will take that recommendation. And I will just
seriously.
play it this version.
Just listen to the soundtrack and you'll be like, I want to play
Yeah.
this. Like listen to the overworld music for the when you get the Delphinius.
Okay.
And it's just like so good.
All right.
Well, I was going to say real quick, Andrew, the reason I even brought up Skies of Arcadia, because I only really have 3 games on my list, because those are the only ones I've really played. I know one of them is probably your number one,
I know,
at least not your top. It's dealing with lots of grinding, so you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, I know that you know what my number one is.
And then Sonic Adventure is the only other one I've played, so I haven't this is what, just to the listeners and any viewers who are in here right now, this is why I bring fans and experts of whatever I'm talking about on this show, because if I don't have experience with it, that's okay for me. I teach it. I consider it a learning experience for myself on the episode, but I don't want to come off as like I'm an expert on the system when I'm not. That's why I have these wonderful guests here with me. But it's all right. So yeah, I only really have 3 that I could even talk about, and I'm fairly certain, like I said, Skies of Arcadia was the only one I wasn't quite sure of, which we now know would be your number 11. And the other one I knew was on, and Sonic Adventure, I'm like 80 to 90% certain is somewhere on that list. So,
interestingly enough, there are no Sonic Adventure games on this list.
What?
I know, and partially because there are better versions of both Sonic Adventure games out there that are not on. Oh, what do we got here?
Corey,
I just wanted to show you my
he just
my
brought
Skies,
up.
my Eternal Arcadia limited box.
That's
Ooh.
beautiful. That is a beautiful box. Holy cow!
Nice, that's huge.
Yeah,
That's cool. I miss the eras of like when you mentioned Lunar, like those box sets that came with the map and the all this.
Yeah, but now every game from Limited Run has a LE with like a limited edition with tons of crap that you don't even want.
Yeah, it's so expensive. But yeah, so surprisingly enough, like I was saying, Sonic Adventure 1 and 2, not on my list, because there are, like I said, better versions on other consoles, like Sonic Adventure 2 Battle or Adventure DX on GameCube. The games that I do have, for the most part, I'm looking over to make sure I'm not being a hypocrite here, but for the most part are only on this console.
Okay.
Going to, or if they aren't, then the iteration on this console is my favorite iteration of the game, which is why there's no Sonic Adventure 1 and 2.
I think if you're because there's a lot of these games did get ported over to GameCube and Xbox, especially Sega specific one or Sega developed ones. So I appreciate you trying to stick to console exclusives, but like I think that's kind of hard to do on it'd be a lot of sports games, a lot of the Sega sports games,
and a lot of these games got ported after the fact.
True, yeah.
It's like if they originated on the Dreamcast, I think that's
fair. I think that's fair. And I know your number 1 obviously originated on the Dreamcast, but sorry, continue. Your number 9.
All right, my number 9. I don't know if either of you are familiar with this, but it's called Ikaruga.
Of course.
Okay.
Of course. Yeah.
I don't usually meet people who know what that is.
I've heard of it. I've never played it, so by all means talk about it a little bit.
Okay, so it is a.
I'm gonna grab all my Dreamcast and just have them.
Nice.
For a second.
I have a little.
If I have some.
I have a little stack here of my favorites, and I will show them as I, of the favorites of that I have anyway, as I get to them. So Ikaruga, Josh, is a shoot 'em up game. It's one of the only shoot 'em up games that I actually like, and I like it because of the main mechanic / gimmick of the game. Is your ship is like two-sided, and on the top it's white and on the bottom it's black, and so all of the enemies are either a white ship or a black ship, and they shoot white bullets or black bullets, and if you are switched to black, the black bullets won't hurt you, but you also can't hurt the black enemies, and if you're white, it's vice versa. So you have to plan.
Well, you can hurt them, but it just like doesn't do as much.
Oh yeah, you're right. It does like half damage or something. So you have to plan, like if there's a crap ton of like white bullets coming at you, you have to like switch to white so that they don't kill you. And so you have to plan like flipping back and forth, getting hit by bullets on purpose that you know aren't going to hurt you. To switch. It's a real mind F of a game, but it's a ton of fun.
This got ported to GameCube, didn't it?
I believe so.
Yes. And it was famously known for having our frothing demand increases, a quote from IGN on the cover.
Our frothing demand increases. Wow.
It's also like on everything now. Like there's an HD version of it. It's a treasure game. It's like on you can get on Switch, and I mean it's like regularly like under $5 on this.
Nice. I didn't know that. I'll have to check that out. All right, number 8. Dynamite Cop.
Oh yeah. You know, great game.
Yeah. Do you know
you fight the Kraken in this game.
And crab people.
Yeah, out of nowhere.
Do you know Dynamite Cop, Josh?
Just assume I don't know many of these.
Okay,
all right?
I'll just talk about them.
It's like the sequel to Die Hard Arcade.
Feel free to if there is anything I know, I will chime in on.
Okay, it basically is Die Hard Arcade. Like when it was, in arcades over here, Josh. I bet if you watched the first level of Die Hard Arcade, aka the real title, which was Dynamite Cop, you would probably be like, yeah, I feel like I saw this in a movie theater arcade somewhere. Like. It's very weird. It's very over the top, very arcadey, kind of like a 3D Streets of Rage beat 'em up type game, but super over the top and weird. Like you can get like air to air missiles as one of the weapons and just absolutely nuke people, like just regular ass people like coming to beat you up, and you have like guns and knives and stuff, but you could also get like drops of items that are like air to air missile or like a freaking giant drill. Like it's very weird, very Japanese. Yep. Very fun, and one of the first, if not the first game I've ever played that has QuickTime events.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I remember that in the arcade. There's a spot where there's a guy coming up like either an elevator or something, or he's right by a window, and you have to time your kick button. And I always remember seeing the little demo on the arcades, and the person, if you time it right, you'll jump through like the window and kick them like through the window, and it's super cool. But it's a ton of fun.
He does it's like one leg out or quick kick.
Yeah, right? It's like a Bruce Lee kick, like a flying like Liu Kang, like through the window. It's so sick. Like I said, very weird games on here. Number 6, probably not going to be too much of a surprise, but Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Another one that was like bring the arcade home. What hasn't been said about this game? It's awesome. My hot take about this game is I actually cannot stand the stages, because this one was they did 3D. They still did 2D sprites, but they did 3D arenas, and I would have been okay with that.
The big clown.
Yeah, the clown head is probably the most iconic one. I would have been okay with that if they had still kept with, because this was coming from Marvel vs. Capcom 1 and like Marvel vs. Street Fighter and X-Men vs. Street Fighter, where all the stages were like places from the Marvel universe or other Street Fighter stages or Capcom stages, but all of them in MVC2 for some reason are just generic stages.
Yeah.
And I don't like,
because there's so many characters they couldn't do them all.
Yeah, I guess. But they also, I think they look kind of weird. The 2D sprites look kind of weird on a 3D background. And I know that's like a very minimal gripe, but it still makes me just want to go back, and I still kind of prefer MVC1 or like Marvel vs. Street Fighter. But the rosters of MVC2 is what makes me go back and play that one, because
it's
like
just
triple
like
the size.
The culmination of all those.
Yeah.
Of all those versus games, and also like Darkstalkers, and Street Fighter Alpha. The thing is I think the sprites don't look that great because I mean at the time it was like, oh, they're reusing these sprites again. And it's like I remember everybody talking about like when are they going to make like a new Morrigan?
She's needed one for ages.
Yeah, or
Colossus.
Like I know it's probably a unpopular opinion at this point, but I don't really care for the soundtrack. Like yes, it's goofy, but the first one, the way that it has like characters' themes.
Yeah, I miss those.
Every time you when somebody gets knocked out and somebody comes in. I mean, I still remember how much I marked out the first time I played Marvel vs. Capcom 1 in the arcade. And of course I had to pick Mega Man. And then as soon as he came in and it starts playing the title screen music from Mega Man 2, I was just floored by that because it gets you so hyped up.
I miss it.
Yeah. And they brought that back with 3 at least.
Is Marvel vs. Capcom 2 the one with Take You for a Ride, or is that a different?
Yeah. Gonna take you for a ride.
Shout out to the what is it, the 8-Bit Big Band or whatever. They did a cover of that. I think it was the 8-Bit Big Band. I'm gonna look that up. They did a cover with my new a new music obsession that I have with the band Lawrence, which I've talked to you about, Andrew.
Yeah. You sent me a couple other songs. They're good. I didn't know that was them. That's so funny.
Yeah, they did. I think it's 8-Bit Big Band. Yeah, the 8-Bit Big Band.
That song's incredible. They made a full version of the song. They took the loop of just I want to take you for a ride, and then they stretched it out into a whole song. And low key, I may be announcing this here. I think that'd be a great wedding song. Just to have in the background and just to have people be like, wait, is this motherfucker, do you have Marvel vs. Capcom 2 at your wedding? I already somewhat cleared it with Polisa, and I know this is not for probably years now, but
I was is this how you're telling me you're engaged, Andrew? No. Talk about an anticlimactic way to do it. I mean, right. Well, actually, it's kind of climactic. It's taking someone for a ride. There you go.
Yeah.
Take you for a ride.
Yeah, highly recommend that cover. You are spot on there.
Lawrence is fantastic. For those who just, without going into a 90-minute gush fest on how much I love Lawrence, they are a soul pop band from New York, and they are fantastic and some of the most talented musicians I've heard in a long time. Anyway, continue, Andrew.
All right, we are at number 5.
Wait, really? Number
6
10
was MVC2.
So wait, hold on. So number 10 was Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. Third Strike, right? Yeah. Second, or number 9 was Ikaruga.
Yep.
Number 8 then was the Dynamite Cop. Was that what it was?
Dynamite Cop.
What was 7 then?
You are so right. I skipped number 7. Number 7 is another weird Capcom fighting game. It's called Tech Romancer.
Okay.
That's like the mech game.
Yeah. So I love this game because it is a love letter to all robot anime, mecha anime. So there's a roster of, I don't know, maybe 10 or so characters. It's a relatively small roster, but they're all so different. They all play so differently, so uniquely. And so there's basically, if you want the Gundam type mecha character who's got the rockets and lasers and stuff, you can have that. If you want the Robotech type character who can transform into a jet, you've got that. If you want the Mazinger Z old school 70s 80s anime, really corny ones, you have that. There's one that's basically the equivalent of a Megazord, where it's not, or Voltron, where it's not 5 people together, but it's 2 twins who pilot separate mechs that can come together and then you fight. And there's one that's a little kid in a mech, but the mech is made out of it has a boat for an arm and a bus for a leg, and it's just made out of junk, and they just drop cannonballs and stuff, and it's got a crane thing. And there's one that's kind of I think the main villain is a kind of biomechanical one from Evangelion, but name a mech anime and it's represented here. There's one that's Armored Core. There's a realistic military looking Metal Gear ass mech that you can fight. But Metal Gear. You can just toss each other through buildings, and it's just a fun, kooky, weird fighting game. And the one thing that I can't often say about Capcom fighting games that I love about this game is that the directional inputs are very simple. So pretty much everybody plays the same way. It's just finding the character that you like and just having fun. And it's just kooky and weird, and it's a blast.
I like it. Maybe I'll check out that. We're always talking about me trying out a fighting game. Since that one's simple, maybe I'll give that one a shot.
Yeah. So I would probably recommend, for the same reasons. Actually, this is I'm glad I skipped 7, because my number 5, which we're at now, is actually a very similar game in how it plays, and I may actually recommend this one a little bit more, depending on if you prefer real people or mechs. So my number 5 is Project Justice, aka School Rumble or Rival Schools 2. Yeah. So Rival Schools
United by Fate.
Yeah. Ooh. Okay. my man. So Rival Schools / this Project Justice is a very similar fighting game. It's like a 3D. Obviously it's 3D because 3D graphics, but on a 3D plane, kind of like Tekken, but not as grounded. It's very floaty and weird and fun and very anime, but it's just a bunch of school kids fighting each other, and it's a 3-person team, and people from the same school like have team up attacks. So there's like, a baseball guy, there's like a boxing guy, and I think one of the characters,
gymnastics, cheerleaders,
kinds of stuff. Cheerleaders, teachers. I think the one character is the principal of the school.
Yeah.
There's the of course the American transfer student guy who's just all like freedom.
Yep. This game is very expensive.
I know. That's one I don't have.
And that is one that like I'm very fortunate to like have held on to it. For some reason I hung on that one because I think I really like the music.
Yeah, great soundtrack.
And I really like the baseball guy.
Shoma,
I think.
I like him too.
And he says play ball.
Play ball. So I think, I still have this one. I'm trying to see the ones that I have physical copies of my favorites. All right, I have 3 more on my list that I have physical copies of. My number 4 is a weird one, and I know this is probably not ever going to be on anyone's top 10 list of games, because nobody likes this game but me, and I'm being...
Is it Pen Triathlon?
No, but that's a great pick, and that would probably be my number 12. Probably not. It is this game. I'm holding it up for our visual viewers. Psychic Force 2012.
Oh, okay.
So this game is essentially, it's another 3D fighter, but the space that you're in is like a cube, and every character is has psychic powers, and so they all have like an element assigned to them. So like, of course, you have your fire guy, your ice guy, your lightning guy, your water guy, fire girl, like everybody has an element or I don't know what you would call this, but like an aspect of physics, I guess. So like there's a gravity guy. I really like him. Mm-hmm. His name is Goo Death. And he uses gravity, and there's a girl who uses sound, and I really like her gameplay because she throws out these little like music notes. And wherever they are on the screen, her secondary attack is like kind of a little like wave burst. So you can literally place notes around and then throw out this little shockwave that will then like hit a note, and it'll go like, and then like almost like the shockwaves from Star Wars Episode 2, the like those things, and it'll ignite all of the other notes around it, and it'll become this like crazy symphony, and then you'll just get caught up in it and take a bunch of damage. It's a really, they almost add like another, like you're not just moving forward and backwards in the space, you're like then like up and down and around, and you're just flying around each other as you're like flying through this like cityscape or what have you. But it's very, very cool aesthetically and relatively easy to play. And the roster is really, really diverse and really interesting. And the last thing I'll say about it is I don't ever refer to this game as Psychic Force 2012. I call it Keith Evans. And the reason for that is because that is the name of one of the characters. He's like essentially one of the main antagonists. And that, most of the characters' names, like the fire guy's name is Burn. This guy's name is just Keith Evans. Like he just has a normal ass name. And I do that because and I highly, highly, highly recommend everyone to watch this. You're going to have to find it on like some like shady ass Russian website, but they made an OVA anime of this fighting game. And it is like The Room of animes. Like it's so bad that it's good, To the
Okay.
you have to find the dub, the English dub, because it was like done in somebody's basement where they probably just got like anyone who had anyone who was there the day of, or like, just record this stupid ass anime thing that we're doing. But the main character says Keith Evans' name so many times, and because they have to fit the lip flaps, he has to say
the first and last name. Probably,
yes, he
right,
has to say the first and last name every time. So he's always like, Keith Evans, Keith Evans.
That's really funny.
Although weirdly, there's one point where he has 3 lip flaps, and he goes Keith, like he just says Keith drawn out for for 3 lip flaps. I was like, that would have been the time to say Keith Evans. Anyway, it's very stupid, and I love it with all my heart. So that is my number 4, Keith Evans, aka
4, okay.
Psychic
Getting into
Force.
the final stretch here, though, or top 3.
Top 3. I alluded to this one earlier. It's the reason I have. Here's my show and tell. Like I said, for the visuals, for the viewers at home, I have the twin stick here. There was a controller that they put out for this game called Virtual On Oratorio Tangram, or as Corey alluded to earlier, VOOT, as it is called.
Yes.
It is a third-person like robot fighting game where you're like behind the robot. It's very fast-paced. It's a first-party Sega game. I'm really sad that Sega has done nothing with this IP, and it is my favorite arcade game of all time. I love sitting down with like the twin sticks. You really feel like you're piloting a mech. All it is just 2 joysticks that look like it would be like a flight stick maybe. There's a button on top and there's a trigger. So you move the sticks away from each other to jump, and you push them together to like boost back down to the ground. So you're jumping and boosting and flipping and sliding, and like it's a very, very
it's like
frenetic game.
Each stick is like a person in Pacific Rim.
Basically,
in a way. Like it's like different sides of your body or whatever, right?
I think so, but it's like like if you pull the right trigger, you do your right weapon. If you pull the left trigger, you do your left weapon. You can push the triggers together to do like your big center weapon. But this is the one that I alluded to earlier, where every character, all the robots have a Sega Dreamcast on their back for some reaon.
Oh yeah.
I don't know why, but it's just very cool to look at. But it has awesome customization. You can change all the colors of the robots. It feels like visually as I think one of the most striking, at least nostalgia wise for me, because it's all very like rough polygon. Like explosions are just like big blue and white, like jagged circles.
The first one was arcade and Saturn, but it really comes into its own here. This is a game that I feel like if you're not playing with the twin sticks, it's almost like impossible to understand what it is that you're
basically
doing. It's a game that I recently talked about this in the video that I did on the Xbox 360 store closing, because this got an HD version on the 360 that is not backwards compatible. I don't think so. And I just kind of came to the conclusion of like, I like this game, but like I barely understand how to play it. And I think that it is the absolutely fantastic soundtrack is what keeps me coming back all these years later. It is such a good like Sega, like Blue Skies style soundtrack.
Yes, you literally said what I was about to say. It's like one of the most quintessentially late 90s Sega games. Like I just see blue sky over the ocean, like the robot taking out off, over the ocean, and then like the spray of the sea as it's flying. Like it's so quintessentially Sega, like I said. And funnily enough, I think it was in the first one. It may have been for this one, but they sneakily. So there's a character, one of the Virtuoids, as they're called, the robots, is basically like a Sailor Moon looking character. She's like got like the little skirt
like the
and everything, and the wand, and like the big hair. And so for her,
shoots hearts.
Yeah, she shoots hearts. She goes Super Saiyan when she's at half health for some reason, which was you actually used her to beat the game for the first time a couple weeks ago. Because I never beat it either because it's so freaking hard. But they sneakily snuck in a theme for her that was so similar to, and this may have been on the original. It was so similar to the Sailor Moon theme song that they actually like kind of got in trouble a little bit, and they had to remove it and change it out for future releases. So if you go back, I forget the title of it, but if you go back and you search like Virtual On Sailor Moon song and you listen to it, it's literally just like a Sega cover of the like dun, 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 dun. It's funny. It literally somebody was like, okay, can we copy your homework? And someone was like, yeah, just change it up a little bit so I don't get in trouble. And they still got in trouble anyway. But it's a very fun game. All right. I know I've been talking for a long time. My number 2, and it's a very close number 2, is this one right here. And a lot of people probably have this series on their list, but not this one. A lot of people say the second one, Power Stone 1.
Okay.
The first Power Stone is a masterpiece for me. I liked 2, but I will never choose that one over the first one.
Yep. I agree.
Oh,
I agree.
Excellent.
I feel like for all the novelty of 4 players in the fourth one, or in the second one, for all the novelty of 4 players in the second one, it's just way too chaotic.
Yeah.
And like the moving stages and stuff.
Right. Do moving stages or 4 players, not both. It's so frenetic. And I like the simplicity of the
only 2
first
players,
one.
right? You can't play
I believe
4 players?
so. Yeah.
Okay. Just wanted to confirm.
Yeah. But it's Josh, have you played that one, or should I just explain it a little bit?
Well, I mean, I actually own Power Stone.
Nice.
I own a copy of it.
Oh, it's a pricey game too.
It is. I
both
looked
one and
into
two
it.
are pricey.
I looked into it. I got a Dreamcast. I bought a Dreamcast a while ago, but there was some friends of mine who they had some friends who were getting rid of their stuff, and I offered to pay like, I think it was like $100, and I got an extra Dreamcast, an extra controller, a Sega Dreamcast box. Like it's pretty worse for wear, but it's a box. Controller or not a controller, sorry. Keyboard with the box, like a Sega Dreamcast keyboard box, and a ton of different games, and one of them was Power Stone, which is, and I like the guy knew what he was. I told, through my friend, I'm like, hey, just so you know, like this is worth like you can get a decent amount for all this. Like right. I can't afford to give you market value because I don't make that much money, but I could give you like 100, and I think it was like either 100 or 150, but 150, and I got all of that. I got like, I think it was like 6 or 7 games, a couple of bootleg games, another Dreamcast, another controller, boxes for that, keyboard and a keyboard box, and all that other stuff for like 100, 150, which I was pretty happy with. That's
awesome. Yeah, I actually have a similar experience. Before I tell you about Power Stone, so I got my Dreamcast off of eBay. I got a ton of games. Pen Triathlon was one, like Kiss Psycho Circus, like a bunch of weird ones. But among those was Skies of Arcadia, Sonic Adventure. No, Power Stone I got separately. But Virtual On, a couple just like throwaway games, and two of these twin sticks. I have the Dreamcast one.
Oh wow! Okay.
And the Saturn one, which you have to get some kind of special adapter to play 2-player with the Saturn one. But all of that was $200. Like the sticks are like $150 each. Like alone, and not even to mention like Skies of Arcadia or getting Power Stone. Like
that's a great deal.
Yeah. This was like 2011 maybe, so like I think it was just someone who didn't really know what they had or was just trying to get rid of it.
Especially in 2011, like I feel like game collecting was not nearly as big as it would become in the next like 5 years. Like I feel like anything like, I want to say like pre 2013 or 14, maybe a little bit even like older than that, but like for right around there is when like game collecting started to really become a more mainstream thing. Then obviously the pandemic supercharged it for a while. Prices are starting to fall again, but anyway, so Power Stone, like I mean, I know it's a fighting game, but that's about it. And it's one of those things, like I said before, I'm not a big fighting game fan, so I can't really say much more about it. I mean, I've seen people play it, but that's about it.
Yeah. So most of the fighting games on this list, the 3D ones anyway, are pretty cut and dry, like fighting games. You get the other person's health bar down, and that's basically it. And while actually, one quick other thing about Psychic Force that I love about it is the mechanic of, so you have a health meter and you have like your aura charge, which is like how you do your special attacks and stuff. The cool thing is and it's kind of like similar to Dragon Ball Z. If you use too much of your like aura stuff, you have to charge up again. You have to hold a button to like refill. The lower your health go, so your health bar and your aura or magic meter, whatever it's called, psi meter, I think, is the same bar. So the lower your health is, the more you can recharge. And so the more, it's a really interesting comeback mechanic. So like if you have really low health, you have a lot more of your psi charge. So you can do a lot more of like your ridiculous, crazy special attacks.
Mm-hmm.
So at a high level, I've seen a lot of really cool like side tournaments at Evo playing this game. It's nuts to watch at a high level. Anyway, so those games are pretty cut and dry and pretty, standard 3D fighters. This game is a fighting game, but there are still items that spawn around. Like you can still go around and you can pick up tables and throw them at people, or you can jump and like spin off of poles and swing and kick people. And but the main mechanic of the game, I would say it's more of like a party fighting game.
Yeah.
It's not a platform.
It almost feels more like Smash Brothers-esque.
Yeah, exactly. I was gonna say it's not like a platform fighter like Smash, but it is that kind of like pick it up and play with your friends, because like you don't have to be, there's no combos to memorize. Everybody's just, you have I think like a jump, an attack, a special, and maybe a grab. But the goal is, one of the items that spawn is one of three the power stones. There's a red one, a blue one, and a yellow one. And if you get all three, you basically turn into like a super version of yourself. So the character that I play, his name is Wang Tang, or Wang Tang, as I said as a kid.
He's my favorite too.
Yeah, he's the best.
He's like the Bruce Lee type.
Yeah, he
with
literally
like the kind of baggy pants a little bit. And...
Yeah, he literally goes Super Saiyan when you get all three.
Yeah.
So like some people get armor and then you can shoot missiles and stuff, but yeah, Wang Tang can serve. I'm sure it's Wang Tang. Yeah, he powers up, he goes Super Saiyan, his hair turns gold, and then he can shoot like little like pew 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 key blasts, or you can do a big ass like spirit bomb thing. Mm-hmm. It's super fun and very easy to pick up and play. And some of the most fun I've ever had since I was a kid playing in the arcade was playing Power Stone at MagFest, and just watching people come and play it for the first time. That's one that I would definitely recommend you play as a fighting game, Josh. But I also know it's not, fighting game purists would be like, it's not.
Yes, I wouldn't categorize it as a pure fighting game. It's just it's more of an action game where you fight each other.
It's all the same to me. It's just two characters on a screen, and it's all about timing. And I find little to no enjoyment of trying to figure out the timing. At some point, I will push myself to at least do it, but it's hard for me. Anyway, we are running along. So Andrew,
yes,
your number one, and then we can go into some listener responses, as well as some of the stuff in chat.
All right. So I will say, last thing about Power Stone is that it feels more like a Mario Party minigame. That's what I'll say.
Yeah. So I can see that.
I'm pretty sure. In fact, I know, Josh, you know what my number one is. Why don't you tell everyone what my number one favorite game is?
What, sorry?
I was just saying, why don't you go ahead and tell everyone what my number one game is?
Well, of course. I mean, if we're going by the Dreamcast name of it, it is Jet Grind Radio.
It sure is.
Later known as Jet Set Radio.
Oh. That's funny that you said, it has to do with grinding. And I thought, like... Sonic
Adventure?
No, I thought for sure it was going to be Phantasy Star Online.
Oh, wow, that's so funny. Different kind of grind.
Yeah. No, I have played this game a little bit. It is very, very fun. It is almost like what I've played of Jet Grinder, and I'll let you gush about it, Andrew. I can't go too long because I will do a full episode on this at some point, which you will be the guest on for, obviously. But it is a fun combination almost of like Tony Hawk meets a collectathon meets a platformer. It's so different. It's so interesting. I know you love it for not only the gameplay, but also its visual style. And, we were talking before about how bring back art direction and stuff like that. This game, I know, is like...
it was the first cel-shaded game.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to
Was
say
it the first? Is it considered the first?
I believe so.
Okay, well, there you go. It's a good-looking game still.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's everything for me. It's the art style was super punchy, even for a game with a console rather with very distinct, bright, fun, colorful titles. This one stands out among all of them because of the cel shading look. Like it's become so iconic, and a lot of games use that now. Any anime game uses cel shading because it looks more anime now. It was the art style, it was the character designs, it was the graffiti aspect, it was the like fuck the police aspect, which I know I have Dynamite Cop on my list, but like I'm definitely more in the line of fuck the police. So I was like, yeah, fight the man, like, and I did graffiti as a kid. I rollerbladed as a kid. Like I love like the funky hip hop kind of like soundtracks. Like it felt like it was almost made like for me. And I got more into rollerblading and I got more into graffiti because of this game. And granted, I did stop doing graffiti when I turned 18 because I was like, oh well, now it's like big time. Now I can get like I can go to jail for this.
Now I can go
really
to jail
for it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was the only reason that when I go back and I want to play Jet Set Radio, I'll play Future. And the only reason is because I liked the more obviously futuristic aspect of their character designs and the future like Tokyo To kind of feel. But there it was such a space in time for me that like, I mean, even the aesthetics of the world, like that futuristic like Tokyo, like it was one of the first games that made me want to like go to Japan that wasn't like a Shinobi or like a very like countryside Japan game. I wanted to get lost in Tokyo. I wanted to see graffiti. I wanted to see like random little shops. And obviously I still do. I still haven't made there yet, but next year I'm hoping. It was just everything. The soundtrack, the little graffiti mini games are so cool, like just matching the arrows and it becomes almost like a rhythm game when you're doing the graffiti. That soundtrack, I have maybe put more hours into listening to the Jet Set Radio soundtracks than I have playing the Jet Set Radio games. They're just iconic.
It's a good soundtrack.
Yeah. So that's my top 10. That's my rant. I love Jet Set Radio, and I will definitely gush about it more on your full episode for it. But that is my.
It's a good game.
Yeah. A little floaty. I do wish.
Yeah, I mean, it just takes a little while to get used to, and
yeah,
that's another game that I feel like I struggled with the Dreamcast controller with. Just trying to go straight. I think with the analog stick.
Yeah, without the notch.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Josh, you had mentioned. What the heck was I going to say? You had mentioned Tony Hawk. The only thing I think that if they do this for the next Jet Set Radio, that they're making a new one. Can we have a grind button, please? Sega, I know you're watching this. All of Sega.
I instinctively just always wanted to hit like the Y button.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or the triangle button, like the equivalent of the triangle button.
Yeah. The top, whatever the top one is. Because you just sometimes you'll have to do something really precise and you'll just snap to like the nearest rail and you're like, I didn't want to do this. And you're going so fast in the other direction that you're just like, wait, but now how do I get back? Because you can't change direction on a rail either, which is something that I think would have been cool to do. Like if you had hit held down and hit the boost button, if you could just like boost backwards instead, that would be cool. And a lot of stuff was fixed in Bomb Rush Cyberfunk, aka fake Jet Set Radio 3.
Yeah. Like the spiritual successor. Even got Naganuma doing some of the music in it.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny if you play Sunset Overdrive at all from Insomniac. That's kind of got a little bit of the spirit of
I could see
of
that.
of Jet Grind Radio a little bit as well.
For sure.
Just because we are running long and it's been over 2 hours of recording already, and we gotta wrap this up. We're gonna go over to the write-ins from the listeners as well as the people in chat here. Since actually, I never thought about this. This is, I think, the first time I've ever done an episode live on Twitch, so that's kind of interesting. So I want to throw it over actually to Stormcrow56K on Twitch, because since we were just talking about games, they shouted out some of their favorite games. Some of them we have talked about already, like Ikaruga and Jet Grind Radio, but other ones that we did not talk about: Samba de Amigo, Choo Choo Rocket, Cannon Spike, and Shenmue. And Shenmue, of course, we have to shout out because that's pretty much the inspiration for the Yakuza series. You know,
Right.
that's like what Shenmue is. I can't say I'm an expert in it. I own a copy of the game as well. I have yet to play it, but everything that I've looked up and read about it, it really much feels like it is the predecessor to a lot of modern gaming trends, but just done back on the Dreamcast. You know, I guess early 2000s is when it came out.
Yeah, that probably...
it was in development for a long time. And just like so many interesting ideas that it's very much worth checking out now if you can, even if it's just like playing like an HD version. You know, at the time, I had a very difficult time getting into it because everything occurs in real time, and that kind of stuff always stresses me out, anyways. But
yeah,
I tried many times to replay it or to like get back into it, and the last time I ever tried with the Dreamcast version, it's where I had to wait for a certain time to arrive, for someone to show up at a place at a certain time, and I fell asleep in real life waiting for that to happen because there's no way to speed up the time.
Right.
But I did play it last year, like the HD version.
Nice.
Like going into it as like now a fan of the Yakuza games or like a Dragon games, and I said I'm gonna like really push to play through it, and I very much enjoyed it. Although, like, you know, there's aspects of it now that it feels like very, very clunky.
Yeah.
But they were just doing stuff with no blueprint or template. Like they're just figuring stuff out. Like, how do we like make this work? And I think that I've heard a lot of people say that the second one's better because, you know, they spent so much development time on the first one just figuring out how this is all going to work together. That now that they have that in place, they can kind of do a lot more in the second one. But then I've heard other people say that the second one loses a lot of that spirit.
Well, they spent a lot of time and budget because wasn't that like one of the highest.
It was like one of the most expensive.
Yeah, it was extremely expensive.
It was like $7 million,
something like that.
Yeah,
in late 90s money, which is like double that, but that's huge for that.
It is. But then you think about something like Final Fantasy Rebirth, which costs like $300 million.
Jeez,
This is hilarious to think.
I mean, well, the game budgets are now like there's a reason why AAA development is a problem now. It's just, that's a whole other conversation for another day as well.
Yeah, I think
another note. This is the one last quick one from Twitch, and it's short and sweet, but I wanted to read it out from Vardenfell Outlander. We are all pro Dreamcast.
Yeah, I
feel like that's a nice little sentiment. Now, throwing it over to comments, I have one comment from Twitter because I refuse to call it the other name. From Adam from The Good, the Bad, and the Backlog. I remember bullying a kid for having a Dreamcast because the console wars were on full swing, and I was a Nintendo fanboy.
That's hilarious.
That poor kid.
I know, right?
That poor kid.
That's some like villain's origin story.
When you're done with all the comments, like, can I just like have a couple of like special mentions like of
games? Before we go into the comments, I'm sorry. Yeah, Corey, go for it.
No, it's okay. You can go ahead and
No. We're still kind of like on the games itself right now. I only read one comment that did not involve games. So Corey, shout out some of your favorites.
Just a couple of honorable mentions because I do want to like go back to Phantasy Star Online because that was it was a huge deal for me. I played that game online like daily. For all of version 1, you know, like I maxed out my character, and I feel like that was the first game that I had. I mean, I think that I had something like 300 and something hours in it by the time I quit,
Nice.
which was just unheard of, you know. And somehow at the time I managed to, I got a broadband adapter for my Dreamcast, and through a total accident. I don't know how I did it, but I was at college at the time and living in the dorms. And by unplugging the Ethernet cable from the system and like doing something on my computer and then plugging it back in. And this is just something I figured out like by complete accident. Is I found out a way to like get around my college's firewall so I could like play the game.
What?
Okay.
I don't even know how I figured it out, but I did. It was completely by accident, and suddenly it worked, and I just repeated that, and it worked every time.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's so funny.
But I mean, Phantasy Star Online, just an amazing, amazing game. I met, like several people I still talk to now on that game.
Wow. I love that.
That's really cool.
I was a little young when that came out. Not to make you feel old, but I think I had just missed that.
It's fine. I mean,
I would have loved
like
it, I think.
21, 22 when it came out. So, I mean, it makes sense. I had never played a game online like that before. And although it was just like, playing, it was very similar to Diablo, where it's just like, you play through levels, get loot, fight the boss, repeat over and over again. It was a great time.
Is the relatively new one, is that just an update of the original?
No, it's a whole new game, and there's just like when they finally localized it, there was already so much content, and now they have this whole like new Genesis thing that I just like. A lot of people say that it's not very good.
Oh.
So I thought I was going to get into Phantasy Star Online too because I really wanted it to come out, and then when it did, it just didn't have that same feel, and also that was almost 25 years ago.
Wow.
So I didn't have the time to be able to dedicate to it. Like
that's something I always talk about a lot on the show, is like how our perception of games change over time, and how like, generally when you're in like that sweet spot of like, I would say like 12 to 16 games will never be better than it was to you in those like 4 years. Obviously that's all personal preference and whatnot, but then likewise, like I played a lot of World of Warcraft when I was in my early 20s, and I don't think I can play MMOs like that anymore. Well, I also don't think I can drink Mountain Dew like I did when I was playing World of Warcraft. But yeah, so that's a very good pick, man. Especially like I feel like we should have shout out because I think it's like one of the first console MMOs, right? Like
I mean
online RPGs.
Yep, definitely. It was just a big deal. It was a big deal. Even though you could only go hunting with 4 people in your party at one time, you'd still run into people like in the Pioneer 3 or Pioneer whatever it is, the ship, and you could talk to everybody, like people then. And this is like me as a huge Phantasy Star fan. Like I was immediately like annoyed by it because I wanted a Phantasy Star game. I didn't want it to be this, but the name alone meant that I was going to play it. And then I got really into it. I'm glad that it was what it was instead of a half-assed attempt at doing like a Phantasy Star 5.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Another thing I want to shout out is Soul Calibur.
Yes.
The
Oh
first
my
Soul
God,
Calibur.
of course. How could we... Andrew, I'm surprised that wasn't on your list.
I know. I think it's just because I liked 2 so much more than 1. But 1 is incredible in its own right, and one of, if not the greatest launch titles of all time.
Yeah. The extent at which it was better than the arcade version, that was the first time where I played a game at home and thought like, this is not even, it's not arcade perfect. It is many times more impressive and better looking than the arcade game.
Yeah.
Wow.
It had a lot of single player content that they added too, so it was like,
yeah, oh yeah.
Do I even need to go
Weapon
to the
Master
arcade?
mode or whatever it is, like the world, and it had like a world tour, like just tons of unlockable characters, and it looked so much better than anything else.
Yeah.
It's, if you wanted to impress somebody, like when you first got the system, like at launch, like that was the game to show.
Yeah. Because 2 doesn't even look much better than 1. Like it's unbelievably
It's not that
good.
much better.
Yeah, Soul
in
Calibur
certain aspects it might be, but
yeah. Soul Calibur's just never really been my game, like of the fighting game series, except for 2. I put a crap ton of time into 2 and then never touched any of the other ones aside from, playing Soul Calibur 1 a little bit at friends' houses or in the arcade. But yeah, just for what it has done and the significance of it, like, even just for fighting games, but for the console game market in general and bringing the arcade home, that may be the most important one, like all time.
And I mean, that's the main 2 that I wanted to mention, because I think that they are hugely important in the pantheon of Dreamcast games.
I also want to shout out my buddy Jay, who it's been like probably 5 or 6 years since he's been on the show, but he is a competitive Soul Calibur player. And at one point in time, I don't know where he ranks now, but he was like within the top 5 in the world in like Soul Calibur 4 or something like that.
Nice.
He's very good at Soul Calibur. He streams all the time. I should really shout out his Twitch channel. I'm going to try to find it real quick. It's hard for me to remember because his Twitch channel is just like JJJJJJJ or something like that. I'm going to have to like look up the specific channel name for it, and then I can shout it out. I can shout it out better. But yeah, Jay's an awesome dude, and he's been a friend of mine for a while, and he is a exceptional Soul Calibur player.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
And I'm trying to find it now because but I can't seem to find it. Anyway,
on that same note, like on something very similar, a similar experience that I've had is a friend of mine that I knew from message boards and in person back in the day won like a tournament, I think at E3 maybe, when that came out, and he won a Suzuki Katana motorcycle.
Yo,
wow. And that same guy is localization lead at Capcom Japan, and he was like the localization lead on like the Monster Hunter series, and most recently Street Fighter 6.
Oh,
his name is Andrew Alfonso.
He was the localization lead
cool.
on Street Fighter 6 as well.
Yeah,
super sick. That's awesome, and a fellow Andrew. Love that.
That's really awesome. And I can't find Jay's Twitch channel. I'm like steadily scrolling through my followed channels. I'm like, where are you? I know you're here somewhere. I'll find it in just a little bit.
If anyone's left in the chat that wants to just drop their favorite Dreamcast game, do so. I wanted to say, I don't know why I feel defensive about this, but I know that I will love Shenmue, but I wanted to say that it would probably be on my list if not for another cardinal sin that I've never played either of them. Well, I played 2 when it was on the Xbox, but I have not gotten around to play either of those, but I know they're seminal Dreamcast experiences that I never got to play.
No better way no better time to play them, because I mean, I played them. Like I said, I finally finished the first one last year.
Nice.
Finally.
Yeah, I actually recently purchased the 1 and 2, the HD, and I plan to. So I do like a segment called Experience Share, where I have somebody on, and I'm like, it's something that they're super into that I know nothing about, and I'm just like, all right, just gush, just go, tell me why you love this thing, get me into it. And I have a friend or maybe an online acquaintance / friend that I've met twice, who lives and breathes Shenmue. And I would love to have him on and just be like, just tell me about why you love it. And that'll get me probably stoked to play it. So one of these days.
I did find Jay's Twitch channel. It's Sinbad with 2 B's, SINBBAD. So if you like Soul Calibur, he is working. He streams that a lot, and he coaches it. He's been competing in Soul Calibur for 15 years, and he makes YouTube videos about it too. So yeah. And he's on Twitter. If you want to follow him, he's JJJ_SC6, and all those letters are capitalized. Any other games you want to shout out quick, Corey, before I go into the last few listener write-ins?
Just looking at my list of games that I own. I mean, Crazy Taxi 1, very
good.
Oh my God,
we didn't even talk about
Crazy Taxi.
I mean, Crazy Taxi. Like, what is funny about Crazy Taxi is that it exists on like other systems, but that game,
it's synonymous with Dreamcast. I feel like.
Well, yeah, but I mean, there is absolutely no reason to play that if you can't have the original music or the original store locations.
Mm.
It like takes
The Pizza Huts?
Pizza Hut, Tower Records, all these places that don't exist anymore. You know, like I just feel like, you know, you need to like. That's what's so great about having like about that original version is all that stuff is intact.
That's such a good point.
Yeah.
And like even new versions, I don't think even have like the Offspring song or the Bad Religion song. In it. Like why even play it at that point?
That got me into the Offspring, and they're still like probably top 5 band for me. And that song, even though I've heard it 100,000 times, is still my favorite Offspring song.
That is the song. I mean,
it's wild how important a soundtrack can be to a game. I mean, think about it. Like with Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, when they did the remakes, one of the big selling points of the ground up remake of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2, they got the licensing for the original soundtrack back.
Yep.
That was a huge deal.
If Superman
it's hard to do.
wasn't in it, it would have failed. Just don't even bother. Just burn it all to the ground. If Goldfinger is not in that game and we don't get to hear, so here I am. It's
getting older all the time.
We are getting older all the time.
Oh god, my bones.
Let's see. I mean, Bangai-O, great treasure game. Mars Matrix, great Capcom vertically scrolling shooter. Bullet hell game. Let's see what else there.
Was Mars Matrix the one where you could pull in the bullets and then shoot them back? Yeah, that was dope.
Great game. Dreamcast had a great remaster of Daytona USA on it.
Daytona.
Let's see here. Of course, you know, Resident Evil Code Veronica. You know, there's the reason that is like not been remade at this point is because it was like partially developed by Sega.
Wow.
Which is crazy. Of course, both the Capcom versus SNK games.
Yeah. SVC2 was great, but I played that one on the Xbox, the original Xbox.
Oh yeah, okay. I imported the Dreamcast version of that.
Nice. This battle was about
I don't know.
to explode.
I always like to take a big old poop on the Sega Smash Pack because it's so bad. It's like it's like total. It's totally. It's total comedy. It's so bad. The sound on it. If you ever get a chance to just boot that thing up, you will die of laughter.
Oh God!
At how bad the sound is.
Really?
Oh my God! It's the sound is just it's so bad that it's hilarious. And lastly, just want to throw out Grandia 2. Grandia 2 is a not nearly as good of a game as the first one, in my opinion. But that version for the longest time, I don't know how it compares to the 1 and 2 collection that came out, but the PS2 version of Grandia 2 was atrocious.
Ew.
And the Dreamcast version is very good, but it does not have the same charm as the first game for me.
I've never played it.
I'm done.
I've been meaning to play the Grandia games in general. Have not gotten around to it either.
Yeah, I have a pretty limited pool of JRPGs that really pull me in, and I think that's maybe one of the reasons I haven't played Skies of Arcadia yet, because I'm afraid that I'm not going to like the gameplay, and I'm going to like everything else except the gameplay, because it is a bit dated at this point.
But still, like, I mean, it's just a great story.
Yeah.
And what I think is so interesting is like those are like the main 2 RPGs on the system, and they came out like in the same month.
Oh wow!
There's also air pirate ship battles in Skies of Arcadia.
I know.
It's great.
I'm gonna play it. I am.
Yeah, it is absolutely just listen to some music online sometime, and it is absolutely worth it.
But all right, well, let me read off these last 2 listener write-ins, and we can wrap this episode up. So first off, Matt, aka Stormageddon from the Fun and Games podcast, as well as Reignite, excuse me. They write in and say, it's a funny thing. The Dreamcast is one of the few consoles that I have never owned at any point. My best friend did, but I have a ton of fond memories of it. Games like Crazy Taxi and NFL Blitz 2000 were a blast to play with my bestie. Games like Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2 are near and dear to my heart, though I wouldn't really get to play them till the GameCube ports. Also, the VMU to this day is one of the coolest things, and it bums me out that no one has tried something like it since. I said that before. It bums me out that the VMUs is not something that it gets kind of look like done again in some way, shape, or form. But I guess, we're kind of gone is the era of memory cards, so I don't know if there's going to be any more interesting ideas done with memory cards like that.
I think you could do something with your phone, like if there was a Dreamcast 2 that came out and there's a Dreamcast 2 app you could download for your phone where you could just do the equivalent of the VMU, but like you just stream something to your phone, or like there's a little mini game you can play on your phone to,
or it syncs to like your Sega account or something.
Yeah, you find treasure, or you do little mini games, or if there's a Sonic Adventure 3, the Chow Garden, you can just play a little app on your phone, and then when you come back home, it syncs and you have your Chow or whatever it is. I think there's something that they could do there without making the physical version of it. Although the physical one would be cool, but I know it's gonna be tough.
They could do it, but I think part of the charm is that the VMU is the VMU itself. It's not just what the VMU does.
Yeah.
It's the tactile sensation.
Oh,
of
yeah.
it
I'm 100%.
holding in your hands and how it interacts with the console and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm 100% on that board. I love that idea so much. I don't know. I don't see them taking that kind of risk anytime soon, unfortunately.
No, I don't either. That's why I was saying I don't think I'd really see it anymore.
Yeah.
The last one here is Chris from the Retro Hangover podcast. Corey and I have been on that show a bunch of times, and also shout out to their King of Games series, which we have both been on. I guess the one that was most recently released was 96, is the one that's currently is coming out on their feed right now. So Chris writes, the Dreamcast was the first console I ever saved for and bought with my own money. I can remember how hyped I was for it. I egged my parents on incessantly to rent it from Hollywood Video before launch just to get a hands-on experience with Sonic Adventure. Everything about it felt fresh and new, and it felt like a second life for Sega since everyone felt it had all but died off with the Saturn. Turns out in the end it was just a last gasp. But it was a console that gave me so many memories. Great games like Soul Calibur, Skies of Arcadia, Phantasy Star Online, Grandia 2. Man, everything you mentioned, Corey,
yeah.
Chris has got on this. And the NFL 2K series and Marvel vs. Capcom 2, among others, were just made the system feel like it could compete with the impending juggernaut of doom that would be the Sony. He writes DVD player and crosses it out and puts in PS2. It was the first console that gave me DLC, that had me playing online and was better and faster than the arcade. Truly a gem that should be remembered fondly. I think he honestly, I don't know if, I guess it's a kind of a huge eulogy for the system,
yeah.
but he kind of sums it up better than I ever could with that last little bit of the, it's a truly a gem that should be remembered fondly.
Absolutely. That was very succinct.
Yeah.
I mean, he said what it took us 2.5 hours to say.
Yeah.
I don't know what you're talking about. We didn't ramble at all. I did really enjoy this conversation with you both, though this is going to be a long episode for me to edit. I think this is, I'm really happy with this because it gave me a fresh perspective on the Dreamcast. And in all honesty, like, if I'm not familiar with the system's library, it's hard for me to truly appreciate. So hearing all the games that you shout out, now a lot of them like I knew prior, but Andrew, especially with your list, with even though there's fighting games on it that may not be my cup of tea, there's a lot on there that I had never heard of before, and it gives me a new appreciation for the system and just how strong the library for this system actually is. Because since if there's a game system that's known for its fighting games and I don't like fighting games, then it's hard for me to appreciate that system's library. But when I hear you talk about it, and you Corey, you both talk about it, I gain a new appreciation for the system. So thank you both for being on this episode. This was a really fun conversation of the Dreamcast. And normally I would say what's the legacy of the Dreamcast? I think Chris said it right there. It's a system that should be remembered fondly, and it's the perfect. If Sega had to go out with any system, as a swan song for their console, for their foot in the console business, the Dreamcast was the perfect one to do it. It really is a great system, and it's a bummer that it didn't work out, even though Sega did a lot of things right with it. It's just a lot of other things wrong happened. Kind of the first, I mentioned before with the Saturn, that was in their control. That was their fault. But the PS2, just bad timing, man. Just bad timing is really what killed it.
Yep. I mean, they really pulled out all the stops, and I don't think that they could have done it better.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anybody could have done it better in that situation.
Given the even though there was some like I mentioned before, behind the scenes shenanigans with like the mix up with who's making the system, even that, like, the system still did really well when it sold, like, even with those complications. And I'm sure there's so many other struggles that Sony or Nintendo or Microsoft had to deal with behind the scenes in trying to prepare the launch for their systems, whichever it may be. So, like, you can't even say that was the reason it didn't work out. It's just the PS2 is the juggernaut that could not be stopped, and it's a damn shame. I agree with you, Corey. I don't think anyone could have done something better given the situation Sega was in and what they put out at the time they put out. Like, they really put out a forward-thinking console that a lot of the things that it does can still be seen today in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I think it kept Sega as the superpower that we know it as, because I think if the Dreamcast had come out and had sucked or had done as poorly as the 32X, the Sega CD, the Sega Saturn, then if this one had come out and it had just been like a fart in the wind, then Sega, I don't think, would have been as nearly as fondly remembered. And I attribute a lot of their success. I mean, you even mentioned, like, fiscally they were about to end, if not for one very kind Japanese man who really whose life force was clearly tied to the Dreamcast itself, and when the Dreamcast died, so did he. So I mean, maybe there was some kind of like blood pact, soul pact there that that's the success was because of this man and all his. Who knows? The world may never know. But I know that as a system that I have some of my most fond memories of games on, and I see it, unfortunately, as a system of IPs that have died and are yet to be resurrected in some form. Can we just please, Capcom? Can we get Power Stone HD? Come on, that's all I want.
I mean, they had a collection on the PSP.
Yeah, that's true.
That's it.
I don't know anyone that has a PSP, though, unfortunately.
I have a PSP.
Nice.
I do too.
Oh, I actually do have one, but I don't have no games for it.
But but I think that's a good place to wrap up this episode. Once again, thank you both for joining me for this wonderful conversation on the Dreamcast and celebrating 25 years of the system. So before we end this episode, as per usual, let's go into some plugs. Where can everybody find you all? So, Andrew, we'll start off with you. Where can the good people find you online, and what would you like to promote?
All right. Well, if you're not watching right now as we're live in the chat
on the Experience Point Twitch channel,
you can find me across the internet space cyberverse at the Experience Point. TheExpPoint. Twitch, Facebook, Twitter, not the other one, Instagram, and TikTok. I'm starting to do a lot more content on purely TikTok, but I'm probably primarily focusing on Twitch right now. I like the live format. I know, Josh, I'm so sorry that you have 2.5 hours coming up on 3 hours to edit, but you can just do what I do, and you just upload it in its rawest, pure form. Mistakes and all, warts and all, as Corey said.
Yeah. There's doesn't seem like there's too many restarts in there. So
there's a couple I'll edit out, but I'm not too worried about it.
Yeah, and I will take this point to thank you two for being over here on the Experience Point. If you're watching that here, if you're not, then you can find video of this where you can see all of our show and tells. And I'm waving my hands around that only the viewers now can see. The audio is you're not gonna see my hands waving around. Don't you want to see that? No. Thank you, Josh, for having me on / being on. Thank you, Corey, for being on, and it was great meeting you for the first time.
Yeah, great meeting you too.
And speaking of Corey, let's throw it over to you, Corey. Where can the good people find you online, and what would you like to promote?
You can find me on the YouTube channel My Life in Gaming, and sometimes on the whenever we feel like releasing I do a podcast with Chris from Classic Gaming Quarterly called "Here's My Question for You." Although we've only released a single, I think 2 episodes maybe this entire summer. But between like work schedules and family vacations, it's they've been fewer and farther between, but hopefully we can get back into a groove with that. That's really it. Like on My Life in Gaming, you can either find us releasing new videos or live streaming every Sunday night.
All right. Definitely check out obviously their videos. I'm a huge fan of My Life in Gaming, and also I've been on their live stream once. Try was nice enough to invite me on while you were out of town, Corey. So you can go out of town another time, and
you guys can play some more Bond games.
More Bond games, yeah. But no, as for myself, you can follow me, of course, on Facebook, Twitter, Threads, Blue Sky, Twitch, @StillLoadingPod in all those locations, @StillLoadingPodcast on YouTube. You can support the show by giving it a 5-star rating or review on whichever podcasting app you are using or listening to this on. It really helps more people find the show, and it pleases the algorithm gods that direct my podcast's fate. I don't know. You can find it all over those places. And if you want to support the show monetarily, there is a Patreon, patreon.com/stillloadingpod. For $1 a month, you get all the episodes a little bit earlier with better audio quality, as well as access to patron voting rights, which I mentioned the Zillion episode before. That was a patron chosen topic, and Corey was nice enough to join me on that episode. So you can help guide the direction of the show by joining the Patreon for as little as $1 a month. $3 a month, you get everything prior plus patron shoutouts, which you heard at the beginning of this episode. $4 a month gets everything prior plus 2 mini bonus episodes, which at the time we are recording this, I will be having an episode. I mean, it's going to already have been out for a little bit on the kind of eulogizing a bit of the loss of Game Informer and just kind of my thoughts and feelings on that. It's kind of a little 20-minute solo rant, not rant, but monologue on it. That's at the $4 level. And at the $5 level, you get everything prior plus access to my monthly movie podcast, which I guess when this comes out, it will. I've been saying this for the last bunch of episodes. When this comes out, it is Still Bonding, which is my monthly James Bond podcast where me and a bunch of friends bond over 007. Try from My Life in Gaming has been on that a handful of times. And once that is done, we're going to be switching it over to Still Family, my monthly Fast and Furious movie podcast, where when you're I was about to do like an Olive Garden thing. If you're not, when you're here, you're family. But no, if you're listening, then I guess you're part of the Toretto family and whatnot. But
when you're fast,
so that
your family.
Oh, family. But so that's everything over at patreon.com/stillloadingpod. And that's it. That's all the time I got for you on this episode of Still Loading. Thank you all so much for listening. Corey, Andrew, thank you once again for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course, thank you.
And with all that said, listeners, I will see you all next time.